Welcome back. This video is a compilation of previously uploaded episodes, which you can find individually on the channel. But if you're new to the channel or would like to watch them again, then here you go. I accidentally discovered an online shrine. I recently received a friend request that reminded me of this story, so I'm going to share it here. This happened after I went to university, so I was 18. I made an effort to make friends after I moved onto campus, so I ended up with a few groups to hang out with, including a new girlfriend, and plenty of people from my class that I liked well enough. There was one class before lunch, where it was traditional for people to go to the cafeteria afterwards to eat in pairs or threes. I wasn't very discerning about who I'd have lunch with, because I got on fine with most people from the class, and we were all trying to make an effort to be social. So when one girl, Lily, asked if I wanted to eat lunch together after that class, I didn't have any reason not to go. We talked about school and that kind of thing, nothing noteworthy, but she did ask me to get lunch with her again the next week. It became a pattern, and there wasn't exactly a way to start saying no suddenly. It was fine, but it did mean I lost the chance to eat with anyone else on those days. In hindsight, I suppose that was the point. One day in class, I asked someone if I could add them on social media. This happened in front of Lily, and I saw her face jerk towards me from a couple seats over. It was such a sharp reaction that it was hard to ignore, and I still remember it. By the time I got home later that day, Lily had sent me a friend request. No friends in common. Don't know how she knew my last name. I was a bit surprised, but I guess she had just dug through the university's social media pages and found me through there. It gave me a bad feeling, but surely it was fine. She ended up messaging me a lot and commenting on anything I posted. I told myself that she was just awkward, and we became friends, if not close. I'd known worse people. She still always got me to go eat lunch with her after one of our shared classes. Other than that, we rarely spent time together in person. I saw her around sometimes, but I never went out of my way to hang out with her. So it was mostly online messaging and seeing each other in group settings. Coincidentally, my girlfriend was also called Lily. This was something that clearly bothered Lily, not my girlfriend, who could have found it less interesting. It's a common name. She occasionally hinted that she wanted my girlfriend to pick a different name, or joked about her not suiting it. She clearly didn't like my girlfriend at all, and I had an idea of why. It was hard to ignore by this point. Lily was starting to unsubtly hint that she had a crush on me, and I tried not to address it, because what was I going to say? I never known what to do when a friend makes a pass on me. I was also not interested in the least, even ignoring the weird stuff she pulled. Lily was not my type at all. She tended to dress and act in somewhere between the 50s housewives and one of those adults who is still obsessed with Disney princesses, if you can picture that. Things took an uncomfortable turn on the day of our last shared class of the year. Instead of asking me to lunch like she usually did, Lily asked me to go for a walk with her. Again, I didn't exactly know how to refuse, so I said alright. Our campus was bordered by a large patch of woodland. Lily led me into the woods and the sounds of our fellow students slowly faded away. She sat down on a log, and I joined her. She started talking about how she was going to miss me over the summer. I tried placating her, but I didn't want to be there, especially because she seemed almost on the verge of tears. I think I tried to make an excuse about having plans with my girlfriend, but before I could leave, Lily chose to kiss me without warning. I was uncomfortable to say the least. I got out of there, and was happy to think I wouldn't see her for a while. I came back to university after the summer, moving into a house with my friends. Without going off topic, there were some serious issues in my friend group, a lot of petty arguing and worse. I broke up with my girlfriend around the start of the school year as well, and basically, the whole mess made me recontextualize things with Lily, because it suddenly didn't seem as bad. That said, I didn't want to be alone with her. We mostly talked online. She was still constantly messaging me after all. One upside of everything was that I started dating a boy. Lily was not pleased to hear that news. I think she hoped to sneak in after I broke up with my girlfriend, but as I said before, that was never going to happen. There wasn't a big gap between my breakup and this new relationship, so she must have thought she'd missed her chance to be with me. This is where the story gets bad. At this time, I was fairly active on Tumblr. I occasionally talked about my life and mostly reblogged photos and stuff. I was on there one day when something odd happened. One of the blogs I followed had received an ask with some phrases I recognized. I took a second to register that I was taken from my About page. That made me freeze. I read the message properly. Someone was asking this completely random person to analyze a section of text from my page, asking for their opinion on the type of person who would write it. I cannot stress how messed up it was to see people talking about me like I was a character in a book they were trying to study. The reply was basically, I don't know, sorry, but the important thing was that the question hadn't been anonymous. It linked to someone's blog. Obviously, I wanted to know who had taken such bizarre interest in me. As far as I knew, no one in real life, other than my boyfriend, knew about my page. Well, no prizes for guessing who was behind it. What I found was like a shrine. She was using a fake name, but I recognized Lily all over that thing. It was this cutesy pink and red page. There was a few posts about her interest, but most of the content was focused on her primary interest, me. Most of the posts were about me. There were accounts of things that I'd done recently, as well as references from things from as far back as I'd known her. It was clear that she'd been keeping tabs on me, both online and offline, gathering up every scrap of information she could about my life, and hoarding it there in her collection. She talked about us eating lunch together, and how special our dates had been to her, as if it was anything other than acquaintances getting food after class. She talked about the time she had forcibly kissed me in the woods, but she wrote it as if it had been mutual. She quoted lyrics from my favorite songs, and talked about how she'd always been there for me, no matter who else came into my life. Lots of references to loving me just the way he is, which answered another mystery about an anonymous love letter I'd received earlier that year, with the same wording. It got worse. There were a lot of posts about my boyfriend as well. These weren't so nice. They got vicious, talking about how he didn't deserve me. He didn't know what he had. If she was with me, she'd be jealous if anyone else would come near me. So my boyfriend not being a jealous person meant he didn't love me. I was angry and hateful. I didn't like to think about the sort of person who would write so obsessively, being fixated on me. One thing that didn't make sense at first was that the blog made plenty of references to Lily's best friend Steven. She had never mentioned this person to me. Her post talked a lot about Steven and how great a friend he was, and how much fun they had had together, how he looked out for her, etc. I was trying to work out whether this was an online friend, when one specific post made it all click. She had posted a photo and captioned it with, "Steven sent this to me. He knew I would like it, and I love it," or something like that. The problem was, the photo was taken from my own page. I hadn't sent it to her. She took it from my page and claimed this fictional best friend of hers shared it with her, because in her head, she split me into two people. In her messed up fantasy life, I was both her perfect best friend who always was looking out for her, and her soulmate, who was bound to end up with her when I finally got over my boyfriend and all the other easy girls I hung out with that she made dozens of posts complaining about. Who was she complaining to? Oh, Lily had an audience. She asked open questions about me and her relationship with me and got messages back from her followers. People who took what she said at face value. I saw a bunch of random people agreeing with this stalker that my boyfriend didn't deserve me and we were bound to break up so I could be with Lily, the person I was clearly supposed to be with. She had this fake fanfiction version of my life for anyone to share their opinion on, and she'd made herself out to be the hero in it all. I went maybe a month back into the page's history. I did not look at everything that was there. It was too much, so I'm not sure how long it had been going on. I sent Lily a message confronting her about the blog. She said nothing, and I can't stress how weird it is to have found pages and pages dedicated to me, with her talking about how she was in love with me and would make sure we ended up together, slamming my boyfriend, and building a fantasy life with two different versions of me in it, that she clearly believed to be real, then acting like it hadn't happened. She said nothing. She didn't address it. She just changed the subject, even after I pushed. And it was like she hadn't even registered what I said. I've never seen anything else like it. She deleted the page, of course, or at least changed the name and hid it so I never found it again. It wasn't the end though. I wasn't going to hang out with her anymore, but we were still shoved together in classes, and she started to actually scare me with what she might do next. I'm kind of a paranoid person. Knowing someone was obsessively keeping track of me for who knows how long freaked me out. The next thing she pulled was trying to seduce my boyfriend. It was an absolutely useless attempt that only made him uncomfortable. He told me about it right away. What was her plan there? Did she hope to tell me he cheated on me and wait for me to break up with him? Why would I want her after that? When that didn't work out for her, she tried hitting on 3 of my other friends. None of them took the bait. She ended up dating one of my former housemates for a while, but made sure to send me messages while they were together, letting me know she'd rather be with me. No thanks. Lily made sure to stay in my life the whole time I was at university. There was a time when I tried to pull away from her, and she ended up starting rumors about me and damaging a career opportunity I'd put a lot of work into. I don't know what else she did behind my back, but it made me realize it was safer to let her think she was a part of my life while ignoring her, rather than doing something that would cause her to get angry. After I graduated, Lily still wanted to spend time together, but I knew I didn't have to now. I made excuses about work and barely talked to her after that point. I almost entirely stopped posting on social media that I knew she knew about. Of course, she didn't give up that easily. She tried to start conversations and asked to meet up with her, attempts I usually ignored. I didn't like to think that she was still tracking me online, but she probably was. I don't know how, but she'd occasionally reference things I'd mentioned online somewhere she shouldn't have known about. The last time we had a real conversation, she sent me a message out of nowhere. We hadn't spoken at all in months, and we hadn't talked about anything serious in much longer than that. Thinking about that conversation still makes my skin crawl, but I'll summarize what happened. At first, she asked me some questions about how long I had known I was queer. I told her some basic stuff, the kind of thing I'd tell anyone who asked. Then she changed the subject. She started talking about how I would feel about her if she was a boy, about wanting to be a boy for me. The messages quickly became fetishistic. She went into plenty of details about the fantasies she had of the two of us. Again, we are not friends at this point. We'd never been especially close, at least not from my perspective, and we had barely spoken for years. I can't imagine sending messages like that to even a close friend, let alone someone who barely knows you. I tried telling her not to pull this crap with me, but she decided to change tactics. She sent me photos of herself, followed by a bunch of messages, basically quoting what I had told her about myself and my past earlier. She was telling me these things as if they had happened to her. She was role-playing as me. The worst part was that she seemed to believe it was real, that those things had actually happened to her. Even when she was quoting me word for word, things I had told her only hours before were now her life. It was like she was trying to absorb my history, to take it over, to make my life part of her. Yeah, I didn't talk to her again after that. I ignored future attempts she made to talk to me, and I eventually silently deleted her from the inactive social media, which was her only real way of contacting me. I really thought she might finally move on. A few days ago, she sent me a friend request. It's sitting there unanswered, because I know if I delete it, she'll only send another one. Lily and I met nearly 12 years ago. This story is just the highlights, and even then, it's only the stuff that I know about for sure. A lot happened behind my back. I know it did. So girl who spent 12 years obsessing over me, fetishizing me, stalking me, and harassing me, let's not meet again. The fantasy life you built for the two of us in your head is the only place you'll be seeing me anytime soon. Grease is the word. I'm going to tell you a story about a terrifying old creep that has stalked me since I was 16 years old. I'm currently 20. So basically, to set the scene, I'm an average height, average size 20-year-old female. I've been told that I'm very approachable and perhaps too nice to strangers. I sometimes just don't have the heart to tell people to fuck off, and I definitely should. Obviously, I'm not going to give specific details, but I worked in a restaurant, which was inside a bigger shopping center. My stalker, an old man named Eric, worked for the actual shopping center itself, and not a store inside it like me. When I was 16 and first started the job, I was quite timid and awkward, and let anyone say pretty much anything to me. I didn't quite know what to say when older customers and other employees would make inappropriate comments to me. I would simply just laugh off whatever people would say or not respond. In my 16-year-old mind, this was a lot easier to handle. I had one other friend at my job who was my age. Her name was Jessica. Jessica had worked there for longer than I had, and one day she asked if I had heard of this guy who worked in the shopping center called Eric. Jessica described Eric as very strange. She didn't describe him as frightening or unsettling, or even someone to be afraid of, just as a very eccentric man. Really, she and other employees would just laugh at his odd sayings and awkward behavior. Jessica has also told me that Eric had brought her a present on Valentine's Day, chocolate. Anyone would think this was friendly behavior or harmless flirting, if he wasn't a 50-something-year-old man bringing chocolates to a 16-year-old girl he barely knows. I began to see for myself that Eric wasn't just an innocent old man with a slight crush. He had other intentions. The first time I remember Eric approaching me was when I was filling up a machine near the entrance of my work. This machine was out of view of all other employees, and the restaurant was empty, so this was pretty much the perfect time for a creep to approach me without being seen. Eric wasn't supposed to enter my place of work when he was working at the shopping center, so he had deliberately gone out of his way to come and speak to me. To describe his appearance, he's your typical creepy old loner. He was gaunt, had gray hair and bald patches, and had beady little eyes which he never averted from yours, and I can't get them out of my head to this day. Eric must have sneaked up on me. As I looked up, he was standing right next to me, a little too close. I could feel his breath on my cheek. "My name is Lucy," Eric asked me. "Lucy, are you married?" He almost giggled after asking me this.
He had a smirk on his face which made me feel like he was trying to pretend he thought I was older than I was. And at 16, I looked 16. Eric liked to ask me questions that he already knew the answer to, just to see what my reaction would be, letting me know in his own way that he had been looking up information about me on social media. He would do this frequently. I began to clock on to the fact that Eric had been going a little further than just approaching me at work, and instead stalking my social media accounts in the weeks following to this first encounter, such as Twitter and Instagram, when he began asking me very specific questions about things I had posted in the days before. For example, I posted on Instagram about a tattoo I got, which was in homage to my favorite band. I was serving a customer one day, only to be interrupted by his shrill but quiet voice. It was Eric. His eyes were huge and he had a look of pure excitement and menace on his face. He had yet again entered my workplace when he wasn't supposed to, just to talk to me. He asked me, "Lucy, what's your favorite, insert band name here, song?" Eric relished in my discomfort. You could see by my reaction that I was clocking on to the fact that he had been viewing my social media, and the thought of that made my blood run cold. I felt disgusted and violated. The tattoo I had gotten was covered by my work uniform, so the only way he could have seen it was by going through my Instagram page. This creeped me out majorly, but somehow, I just forced myself to forget all about it and carried on working. Over the course of a few months, Eric would come into my workplace more and more frequently, asking me bizarre questions, and still reciting back to me the things I had tweeted about or posted on Instagram. Every time I would see him, I would get visibly uncomfortable, and he liked this. This is what he wanted. All while this was happening, Jessica approached me and let me know that Eric had followed her in his car on her walk home from work, slowing down to ask where she lived. I had also been told other disturbing news about Eric from multiple different people. It seemed that he was becoming more invested in whatever his intentions were towards me and Jessica. News had traveled to one of my managers about Eric's unsettling actions towards me, and his manager informed me that a few years ago, Eric was rumored to have followed a young girl who used to work for my restaurant into a toilet. Things didn't quite make sense to me. He was known for being a creep yet still employed at the shopping center. On one hand, I was glad to know that I wasn't just creeped out for no reason, but on the other hand, I was frightened that he had been doing this for years yet no one stopped him. Anyways, there was a woman who worked at the same place as me called Rebecca, and she had some sort of disability which caused her to befriend and be trusting to people without knowing anything about them. It seemed that Eric took advantage of her, as he had asked for her phone number and she gave it to him. Rebecca had showed me her text with Eric. He had texted her things like, "Rebecca, are you alone?" and "Rebecca, are you sat on the bus alone?" But the most unsettling part of it all was a text from Eric that read, "Rebecca, could you please let me know any information on the girls that work at insert restaurant name here?" I was stunned. This was quite slowly turning into my nightmare. I was constantly questioning why this old man was so hell-bent on finding out everything to do with my life. Why me? He had gone out of his way to source information about me through a vulnerable person I worked with, and I was scared he was going to go further. Again, this creeped me out, but still for some reason, I forgot about it and carried on with my life, which was very hectic at the time. And in a way, I'm grateful that I didn't have the time to dwell on Eric's growing obsession. However, this was something that I wouldn't be able to ignore forever, as Eric began inserting himself into my life in ways I couldn't just ignore or brush off. One night I was watching the movie Grease with my family, and I must have tweeted something stupid like, "Grease is my favorite film," because it's a great film, right? Anyways, the morning after my tweet, Eric approached me in his usual way and utters, "Do you like the Grease film, Lucy?" The same usual smirk lit up his face, and the same usual wave of disgust washed over me. He was really making it a point to let me know he was watching me. I tried to carry on with my day, but spent the entirety of my shift feeling a little shaken up. To someone reading this story, it may not seem as unsettling to you as it did to me at the time. But when somebody is going out of their way to make sure you know they know information about you, you spend every waking hour thinking about what they plan to do with that information, and why they insist on taunting you with this knowledge. The very second I clocked out of work and got into my car, my phone went off. This was a notification from PayPal. I clicked on the notification to see that I had received £3 from Eric Stanley, and the note attached to it read, "To Lucy. Grease is the word. From Eric." He literally found my PayPal account and sent me £3 with a quote from a movie attached to it. If this wasn't crazy enough, in the days following I received a string of anonymous calls, incessant calls, one after another. I was in a flood of tears and ended up having a huge panic attack. I felt like there was no escape. My phone rang and rang all night. I had to turn it off to get away. Even when I turned my phone back on, the calls continued, and every time my phone would ring, my head felt like it was being impaled by the sharpest knife in the world. I was on complete edge. The phone calls that I did answer were just someone breathing down the phone, making a point to breathe heavy. I even swear that they were trying to sound like they were jerking themselves off, which sickened me. I had no proof this was Eric, but it wasn't hard to put two and two together after all the lengths he had gone to in order to track down my personal information. If he had found my PayPal address, my phone number, and all of my social media accounts, what was stopping him from finding out where I live? Breaking in? Hurting me or my family? That night I had horrific dreams in which he chased me around my house and taunted me for hours. I still have similar dreams and struggle to sleep without my boyfriend present, as I'm scared he's standing outside my door to this day. I reported Eric to my managers, and they passed my complaint on to the managers at the shopping center. At this point I was genuinely scared for my life. Multiple girls added to my statement, and adding details of times they had witnessed Eric's unsettling behavior, or times he had been inappropriate with them too. Eric had been cautioned by the shopping center's management, yet nothing was done, except for the fact that he was warned not to talk to me. Eric found ways around the no talking to Lucy rule. He would make animal noises when he would see me, like a monkey or a dog, or any bizarre noise that would get my attention. I think he just wanted me to think that he had outsmarted me, found a way around the rules. After this, I stopped working at the restaurant as a full-time job, and saw Eric less and less, which was obviously great for me. I moved cities and I went away for university. I made new friends, which distracted me from my old life in my hometown. I thought about Eric every now and then, and when I focus on it for too long, I can't be alone, out of the fear that he's still keeping tabs on me. The thought of that terrifies me. After moving away and starting my new life, I forgot all about the twisted little man who used to obsess over me at my old job. I forgot he existed, but I was soon going to remember. On Christmas Day, I was back home in my hometown with my parents. My phone buzzed, and I expected it to just be another message from a friend or family member, but I was wrong. I received a notification from PayPal, and it was the exact amount of £3. Only not from Eric this time, but from a girl whose name I didn't recognize at all. I opened up the PayPal app, only to see a note attached to this payment I had received. The note read, "Sending on behalf of Eric." My blood ran cold again. I had forgotten all about this man, and all he had done to make me feel unsafe and unsettled, and here he was again, antagonizing me, yet this time, doing it through other people. Perhaps his way of telling me that him being banned from talking to me himself wouldn't stop him from entering my world. I threw my phone down the couch and spent the night drinking with family, until I forgot about the notification. I probably should have told someone about it, but I just wanted to do as much as I could to block him out. I didn't want him to control me anymore, and since I haven't seen or heard anything from him, I wanted to stay that way. I think Eric still works at the shopping center, and lives local to me. I avoid my old workplace so I don't have to see him, and he doesn't have to see me. So to the creepy, beady-eyed freak that made me live in fear, let's not meet again.
Church in the Woods. I posted this story on r/backwoodscreepy a while back on this throwaway account. My wife suggested that this sub might find it interesting as well. Here goes. I grew up in Ohio in the 70s, and me and my childhood friend Joe were outside all the time we could manage it. Joe lived on a farm that bordered a pretty big forest, and my parents would drop me off in the morning, and we'd stay in the woods all weekend. We'd only come out for school. We left pretending we were frontiermen. We'd build shelters, traps, practice making fire with sticks, the whole 9 yards. When we got to be in high school, we got this notion to pull a Stand By Me. This was based on a movie of the same name that had just come out. The idea was that we would walk on the railroad tracks out in the country, but instead of looking for a dead body, we'd find cold bridges to fish from and camp a little ways off the tracks. Of course, we knew this was dangerous, and we'd likely be trespassing, but we were kids. We had a lot of fun. We did find beautiful rivers. We discovered bridges no one went to. We fished. We hid from trains. At night, we camped in the woods just near the tracks and made small hidden fires. Nothing bad ever happened. It was idyllic. In fact, it was so fun we did it multiple times. Never had a problem. After high school, me and Joe went our own ways. We both left home, but always stayed in touch and always tried to coordinate visits so we'd see each other occasionally. Well, one summer in the mid-90s, it worked out that we were both in town for about a week. We'd do stuff with family in the day, and at night, we'd either catch drinks at a bar or sit outside Joe's house around a fire and talk about the old days. One night, me and Joe got to talking about our Stand By Me trips. Well, nostalgia and beer are a hell of a mix. Soon we decided to take a day, walk the rails, camp one night and walk home. The day came. We started out early morning.
We had my wife drop us off in the old spot where we used to start, right outside her hometown. She thought this was absolutely crazy and made sure to mention it. When she pulled away, Joe suggested that instead of walking our usual route, we take the opposite direction, just to be adventurous. We knew the land well, we had a map, so I gave a, "What the hell?" and off we set. The day went fine. It was fun and a little sad, but in a good way. We found the bridge and sat on the edge, smoked a joint and moved on. We had no fishing gear, but we brought some canned food and other stuff. Before the night started to set in, we picked a spot to camp. It was a thick and forested area, trees on every side of the train tracks, so you felt like you were in a tunnel. We had brought small hammocks to sleep on, but before we set them up, we decided to do a little scouting of the perimeter. Now this is what we used to do in the old days too. We'd walk the area around a little bit to make sure some dude's house wasn't just over a hill, and we were actually camping in their yard. We walked maybe 100 or so feet into the woods and up a small incline. We figured if we didn't see anything from the top of this short hill, we'd be fine. But when we got to the top, we saw an old building down at the bottom, about 100 yards into the woods. It was barely visible. We pondered over what to do. We both assumed it was a sugar shack or something, because there didn't appear to be a clear road into it. From where we were, there didn't look to be anyone in it either. It was all quiet. No movement could be seen, no lights. We decided to walk a little closer just to make sure. We came down the hill very slowly, and as we neared the building, we saw it wasn't a sugar shack at all. It was an old church. It looked like it had been abandoned for years. It was a squat, sagging building, whose wooden planks were almost black from the years of moss and rot. A cross still stood on top of the place, also weathered black. None of the windows had glass and there were no doors, just open doorways. We got close enough to see inside. There were rows of pews and a built-up section in front for a preacher to stand. We didn't go all the way in. We didn't want to. Beyond all that, there was no sign of anyone else. No footprints, no paths, no roads. It was an abandoned church. We left immediately and back up the hill to our spot we had picked to camp. Having a hill between us and the church made us feel better. But we were still a little uneasy. We chalked it up to the natural creepiness seeing a church in the middle of the woods would be illicit. Besides, at this point, it was dusk, and we just wanted to rig up our hammocks and go to sleep, and move on at early morning. Night set in, and as we lay in our hammocks and shot the shit, we began to hear something in the direction of the church. Our conversation about it went a little like this. "Do you hear that? What the fuck is that? It sounds like people singing." And it did sound just like singing. We both slid right out of our hammocks and hunkered down, straining to hear more. We listened for a minute or two, and the singing continued, but it wasn't getting louder. Finally, we decided to creep back up the hill and see if we could spy where the sound was coming from. We could still move very quietly in the woods from the old days. It was second nature to us. The moon was barely out, but it provided enough light so you wouldn't walk right into a tree. But it was near pitch black. We didn't use flashlights as we crept slowly up the hill, and we didn't talk. When we got to the top, we saw a light in the distance. It was coming from the church, and the singing was coming from inside. Joe and I put our heads close together and hushed the conversation that boiled down to, "Can you believe this shit?" The light looked to be candlelight from the way it flickered, and though we tried, we couldn't make out what was being sung. It sounded like church music, but in another language. We sat and watched for a while, trying to see who was in there, but we only saw occasional shadows. We had no intention of getting closer either. We had about a football field length between us and we aimed to keep it that way. The singing continued for a bit, and then it stopped. After that, a booming male voice began to chant. I was already freaked out, but this voice thoroughly scared the shit out of me. It sounded like some Old Testament preacher you see in the movies, but again, it was like he was speaking in a different language because we couldn't understand a single word. Eventually it got to where the single male voice would say something, and then a bunch of voices would answer in song. It lasted for a while, and then they all broke out into this long sustained wail that just kept getting louder. It got so loud and so disturbing that I covered my ears, and then it stopped. At this point I was getting ready to say, "Let's get the fuck out of here," when Joe put his hand on my shoulder and hissed, "They're coming out." We were far enough away that we couldn't make them out really well, but what we could see was a line of figures walk out the open doorway, all holding hands in a single file. We could see some of them had flashlights. They began to sing again, and the light from the flashlights began to move towards us and the hill. We booked it back down to our campsite, grabbed our shit and ran to the tracks. Once there, we ran down the tracks in the direction we had come from. After a few minutes, we stopped and looked back. We saw lights coming down the hill. They were moving erratically, like whoever was holding them was shaking them. We continued to run in spurts and walk as fast as we could. We eventually stopped seeing the lights and came to a road. By our map, we knew a small town was about 15 minutes down it, and we walked there, got to a 24-hour gas station, called my wife to come get us. My wife and other friends all thought it was just kids messing around, but I heard those voices, and they sure as hell didn't sound like kids to me. Not sure who those people were, but it was definitely the creepiest thing that has happened to me out in the woods. I was almost kidnapped and beheaded as a child. I've always wanted to share this story, and I've decided to use an old throwaway account since I usually just lurk. I have no real way of proving my credibility, but if you've ever visited or live in a rural part of South Asia, you can probably vouch for me in saying that it's a lot more plausible than one might assume. Also, this ended up being a lot longer than I thought, but I wanted to recount it precisely the way I remember it. I had one of those moments recently, where a lot of things come together in my brain to make sense of an event that my child mind couldn't properly comprehend at the time. So, my mom was born and raised in the UK, but she is of South Asian descent, and since I'm mixed, she tries really hard to make sure I'm in touch with my culture. This meant that as a child, we made a lot of frequent visits back home. It's like every summer I can remember we spent there, and then it suddenly just stopped after this incident. My mom's family back home lived in an extremely rural part of the country. There was a lot of poverty surrounding our family home, so we rarely left our part of the village. I was never allowed to explore, and coming from the concrete jungle that is London, I was always so curious. I'm going to explain what happened on this one particular day, the way I remember experiencing it, and then I'll explain what I failed to realize at the time. I was 8 at the time. One of my uncles from a neighboring village would often visit with his children, and when they did, my mom would let me go with them to a small hut-like shop that sold sweets and snacks like 15 minutes away from the family home. My cousins were 11 and 19, both male, and it was broad daylight. To get to the shop, we would walk through a small DIY road, and on both sides is what I would call the jungle. It was basically just lots of trees and bushes as far as you can see. You can't really see anything beyond the trees. It's just a lot of greenery. I'm mixed with East Asian, so being an obvious foreigner in a rural part of back home meant that I was pretty used to strangers staring and asking me questions. I was also used to creepy men who would tell me I was beautiful because I have pale skin. My mom warned me about these men and made sure I knew to stay away from them. So the road to the hut was paved with creepy people making creepy comments and my cousins basically telling them to leave me alone. In less pleasant terms, there was also a group of young guys. Some of them had motorbikes and some were just chilling. One of them waved at me. He seemed friendly enough, and I had met so many people that my mom was convinced I must remember from last time that I had zero recollection of. So I just waved back and went about my day. Once we got to the hut, we immediately started losing our self-control with the snacks. The owner was super friendly, and he let us try a bunch of the sweet mishtis he had, and he also had kulfi ice cream for the first time. I distinctly remember being really excited because my mom and one of those ladies that worked as a cook both loved kulfi ice cream, so I thought it would be a nice surprise for them. I asked for 3, and the nice guy gave me 4, and so my hands were full and they were quickly melting. And he told me to run, 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 go home quickly, quickly. I told my cousins I would get a running start, and once they finished, they could catch me up. I would still be in their line of sight, plus it was daylight and it was a busy road. I start running back. There are a few older aunties stood at the top of the road, and something about their presence gave me a sense of security. I felt a lot safer knowing that they were there, and paired with the fact that my cousins were able to see me clearly, I felt comfortable enough to just walk back leisurely, minding my business, eating my ice cream. I passed a group of guys, and the one that had waved at me came over to me. He said I was X's niece, right? X being my uncle. And he jokingly took one of my ice creams and said, "She got an ice cream for Mama." Mama means uncle in our language, and so I just assumed he was a friend of my uncle's. He asked me when I arrived and how I was finding the country. He was so friendly, and he didn't look like the stereotypical creep. When I said I was going home, he said, "Why don't you let Uncle take you? You can ride on my motorcycle." I think that's when something clicked in my mind, that maybe he wasn't the friendly uncle I thought he was. That's also when I realized I was pretty much circled in and surrounded by the group. It was also when I realized I couldn't see my cousins, or the group of old ladies, which also meant they probably couldn't see me. I wish I could explain in words how hopeless and afraid I was. I had all the threats in the world explained to me by my mom, in a country where I knew I was vulnerable, and had to be cautious, and I still managed to find myself in a dangerous situation. Luckily, my cousins came running and shouting, and the guys ran off into the jungle. This creeped me out because there was nothing in the jungle.
It was just trees as far as I could see, and I knew that it would be nearly impossible to find him in all of that. We caused quite a scene, and the villagers seemed to react as if they were already on edge. When we told my family what happened, I was basically on house arrest, and my mom refused me out of her sight. I was pretty shook up about the whole situation, and so, honestly, I was kinda grateful for that. I put it down to my paranoia, but at the same time, I would get overwhelming feelings of being watched. Our village is quite small, like amongst them, it's an everyone knows everyone sort of thing. My uncle was also a big community figure, and he's very well known amongst the villagers, which is why the men probably put two and two together that I was his niece. Having foreign family over is usually a pretty big deal, and having a niece that is mixed race is also a very big deal. I'm sure word got around. He realized that there were a group of men on motorcycles who would frequently go past our house, and that they weren't anyone we would have known. It's creepy to think about it now, and the lengths they were going to. A couple of days before we were due to fly back, I had my second, last, and worst encounter with this particular friendly uncle. It was night, and it was like every other night, where we would play board games or card games in the front room. Because it was so hot, I went to my bedroom, and I was playing on my Nintendo DS, when I saw out of the corner of my eye, someone at the window, staring directly at me. It was him. The worst part is he had the most creepy, sick and twisted smile I've ever seen. He put his fingers on his lips, but I did the literal opposite and started screaming hysterically. I had been on edge since the ice cream incident, so what might seem like a little overreaction was just my natural response. I can't really tell you what happened next, because no one has ever told me. My very large uncle and his also very large friends are not known to be the friendliest of people, but I was told that he was dealt with, and that he would never bother me again. We recently received a wedding film from one of my cousin's weddings, and part of the film was her leaving to get to the venue, and I noticed that the jungle was no longer there. It had basically been cut down. For the first time I could see beyond the greenery. That's when my mom explained to me that my uncle had it cut down not long after that particular visit, because of the head cutters. My entire life, I have wondered what would have happened to me if I had gone on that motorbike, but now I know with reasonable certainty what his intentions were. During that time, a gang had been kidnapping beggar children. It took a while for the village to realize, because it's not unusual for beggar children to go missing. When we were there, people were vaguely aware that it was becoming a trend. A couple months later, a head was found. It became known in our village, but people tried to keep it quiet to avoid getting a bad name. The problem went away once a lot of the greenery was cut down, so there was nowhere left to hide. But it's also when they realized the magnitude of what had happened. The weird thing is, I've known about the head cutters for a while. I knew it was something that had occurred in our village, but for some reason, until recently, I never put two and two together. But now that I have, I often think about what nearly happened to me. More importantly, what happened to a handful of children in our little village. I think about the fact that, beyond our relatively small circle, no one thinks about them. No one is haunted by their deaths. So to the creepy uncle with the motorbike, let's not meet again. I wish the children had never met you, and I hope that no one has the misfortune of meeting you ever again. "14-year-old psycho." When I was 11, my family lived in Alaska about 14 miles north of Anchorage. As soon as you leave the actual city of Anchorage, you're in the wilderness pretty quick. This event happened to me in the summer of 1977. I remember because the original Star Wars had just come out a few weeks before, and I was obsessed with it at the time. In 1977, the town I lived in was actually just a series of roads and off-roads. Most of the people there commuted to Anchorage for work. That's what my parents did. They both worked nights, meaning I spent most of my time alone at home. I don't have any siblings, and our house was about a half mile from the nearest paved road and surrounded by woods. I didn't have any real friends that lived close by. I knew a kid who lived at the end of my road. His was actually the next closest house and was still about 300 yards from mine. One afternoon that summer, I was watching TV when there was a knock at our side door. I looked outside and saw it was the kid at the end of our street with someone else. I opened the door, and he told me this kid was his cousin whose family had flown up from wherever they were from to visit. I can't remember the kid's name. I do remember immediately being nervous around the guy. He had blonde hair down to his shoulders, wore a t-shirt under a thin leather vest. He also had one of those wallets on a chain. The kid's eyes were dark as hell. I was 11, and hadn't ever seen evil before, but this kid set off something in my brain.
The boy from down the street even seemed nervous around him. He said he had told my cousin about my BB gun and how cool it was. I had recently been given a BB gun as a gift. I told him to wait outside and I would get it. I just knew I didn't want that kid in my house. I got the BB gun and went outside and handed it to the weird kid. He rolled it over in his hands and looked it up and down without his expression ever changing. Without handing it back, he asked me, "How much do you want for it?" I can't remember my reaction after all these years, but I didn't really need money, and the gun was a gift, so I told him it wasn't really for sale, and I remember apologizing for some reason. Unfazed, the kid hands the gun back to me, then reaches behind his back and pulls out the biggest damn knife I'd ever seen. I remember thinking for a second that it was a sword. If you've ever seen the movie Crocodile Dundee, where he tells some robbers, "That's not a knife, this is a knife," and pulls out a huge knife, well, that's the knife this kid had. This kid said, "How about a trade then?" I shot the BB gun at cans. What was I gonna do with this thing? Hunt a grizzly bear? I declined the offer nervously, and the kid turned away and started walking in the direction of their house. I went back inside and watched some more TV. About an hour later, there's another knock on the door. I go to our side window where I can see the door. I peek out and sure enough, it's that kid again. This time he was alone. The second time he knocked, he was louder. He called my name. I stayed quiet. He left the door and started walking around our house. My mother had a sunroom where she grew plants, and it had large windows along the wall. I saw him go to those windows, press his face against the glass and cup his eyes, trying to see deep into the house. I stayed out of sight. Luckily there were no lights on, and I had turned the TV off when I heard the knock. When he couldn't see anything, he continued around the house. He took out that huge knife and began tapping the butt of the handle along our outer wall as he circled. Then he started saying, "I know you're in there." I almost shit myself, of course. He knew I was in the house. I was 11, home alone. How could I have left the house, hop in the car and take off? Hell, both of our cars were gone anyway. I continued keeping low and quiet, hoping he might think I had left to a friend's house somewhere else. How long could this psycho just circle the house? He was maybe 14. He'd get bored pretty quickly. No such luck. This kept up for about an hour, the tapping in his voice telling me to come out, and that he had another trade for my gun. Screw that. I had gone all in on the "I'm not home" tactic, so I stayed quiet and made my way to the kitchen, where our telephone was. This was 1977. No cell phones, and our phone was attached to the wall in the kitchen. Luckily, it had a super long handset cord. I got it, stayed low on the floor, and called my mother at work. She took me seriously, but there was no way she could get home. My dad was in the Air Force, and they sure wouldn't let him skip out early to handle his son's crisis. I would have to ride it out. The sun had gone down, and by that I mean it was barely peeking above the horizon. In the summer, the sun never went completely down in our area. The kid kept pacing around for another 30 minutes or so, and then was suddenly gone. Not being an idiot in a horror movie, I just stayed down and quiet. Eventually my parents got home. I was still awake. They brushed it off as if to say, "See, nothing to worry about." I never hung out with the kid down the street again, and I pretty much stayed inside the remainder of the summer. There was something wrong with that kid. Maybe it was in my head, or maybe he would have done something absolutely brutal to me, just for that damn BB gun. Man plans on killing my mom and I before dad steps in. So this is a shorter story that my dad told me had happened when I was about 1 or so. We were living in New Mexico at the time, and we're out for a Saturday just exploring. We were going in between places when my dad decided to stop the car at a local gas station to fill up, and he had left his credit card at home, so he was going to have to go into the gas station to pay. Meanwhile, all the excitement of the day was too much for me as a baby, and I mysteriously soiled my diaper. You know, as you do. So my mom realizes what I did and grabs her diaper bag and lays me down in the back seat of the car. She was standing outside of the car changing my diaper, and then all of a sudden my dad comes running up to the car full speed and asks, "Are you alright?" And my mom is really confused and asks what he means. My dad goes on to explain that he was in the gas station. He looked out towards the car and noticed a man who was sitting in a lawn chair nearby. He noticed the man stand up and didn't think anything of it. My dad looked away for a couple seconds, and when he looked back, he saw the man had acquired a tire iron and was hunched over slightly trying to approach our car with my mom and I. My mother's back was turned to the man and to the gas station, and so she didn't see him coming. My dad said the man was about 20 feet from my mom and I before my dad ran out and yelled at the man, who promptly took off running in the opposite direction. Then my dad came to meet us at the car and saved the day. I shudder to think what the man could have done to my mom and I if my dad hadn't been paying attention. Also, the area in New Mexico we lived in was not exactly safe, and this was not the first or last creepy/dangerous experience we had in this area. So we moved to Colorado later that year. Random man at my door. This happened about 15 years ago. I was 21 years old and living in my very first apartment. It was a small bachelor apartment in a sketchy area. I grew up in a town that was known to be rough and tough. I knew how to handle myself and learned at a young age to keep my head down and not go looking for trouble. My apartment building was behind a bar. A lot of the customers of the bar would stand outside and smoke. When they stood outside to smoke, they would be looking at my apartment. Most of the people who were out smoking kept to themselves. A few would nod and say hello if I passed by, never any issues, until one evening. One evening I came home from work. I passed the bar and saw this extremely tall man outside smoking. As I passed, he stared at me. I gave him a slight nod, but he didn't acknowledge me. He just continued to stare. It made me uncomfortable, but I didn't think much of it. About an hour later, I hear a knock on my door. It was odd because you have to buzz people into the building. The building only had 8 units, and I didn't really know any of the neighbors. I froze because I really didn't want to talk to anyone, but the knocking continued. I finally shouted out, "Who is it?" But there was no response. I shouted again, "Who's there?" And the voice said, "It's Tom. I don't know anyone named Tom," so I shouted back, "I don't know anyone named Tom. You must have the wrong apartment," the voice said. "You may not know me, but I know you. Open up so we can talk." I went to the peephole and it was a tall dude from the bar. I loudly said, "Fuck off, or I'm calling the cops." I heard his footsteps walk away and heard the building door open and then close. He was gone, or so I thought. A few minutes later, I peeked out the window and he was standing in the parking lot. He seemed to be talking to himself. At this point, I'm freaking out. I called the landlord who lived in the building next to me. He told me to call the police and that in the meantime, him and his brother would come check things out. I called the police and tell them what's going on. They said a car is on the way. Meanwhile, my landlord and his brother make their way to the parking lot. I watch out my window and see them approach the tall dude. The tall dude takes one look at them and bolts. My landlord and his brother try to chase him, but the tall dude got away. About 5 minutes later, the police arrive. I gave my version of the events and a description of the man. The officer stares at me and says, "We've had reports of a man matching that description who has been sexually assaulting women. Thank God you didn't open that door." A few days later, I get a call from the officer. He told me part of their investigation was talking to the owner of the bar. The owner called the police when the tall dude reappeared after a few days, and the police responded and arrested him. So tall, creepy dude from the bar, it was a close call, and I sincerely hope I never meet you again. Let's not meet again, Montana hunters. So my wife and I backpack and hike a lot. The more remote the place, the better. In 2015, my wife and I were in the Bitterroot Wilderness in Montana. We had been out for 2 weeks on a 100-mile route. Finding trail, we kind of connected together on a few topo maps to make a loop. We had only seen one other person, Tom. We met him on our second day in and his last day out. He had told us he hadn't seen or ran into anyone out there. So as far as we all knew, we were going to be out there alone. He told us hunting season was weeks away, but there might be scouts out. To be very careful with our food, where we eat, and our scent, because it's bear country, and he's seen a few and even more with cubs. He also mentioned that he had heard a cougar in the distance, but that we should be okay as long as we stick together. We camped together that night and thanked him for his company, all the info, and parted ways. For 2 weeks we hiked, saw some cool vistas, swam, and saw and heard wildlife. All the stuff you'd expect to see in the backcountry. We didn't really think about Tom again after a few days out, and hadn't seen anyone. We took the thought of being alone for granted and let our guard down. As far as other people were concerned, we were all alone out there. We were in our last few days out, winding the trip down, sauntering back to the trailhead, just taking it all in. We find a nice tent site, make a fire, some dinner, hang our food bag and walk back to our tent for the night, and pass out for a good night's sleep. The next morning, as backpackers do, we break the camp as early as possible to get some breakfast and coffee into us. But before we leave camp, I need to drop a deuce, so I venture away from the tent site to find a suitable spot. As I'm walking around to find a place to dig my cat hole, I come up on a lumped up thing looking like a bush. I was not expecting to run into anyone out there, as we had only seen one other person early on and no one else since. I wasn't paying attention, as I'm looking for somewhere to shit and not out looking for people. These two were in a camo blind type of wrap. I didn't realize that they were out there, and they didn't hear or realize that I walked up on them to the last goddamn minute, when I was right on top of them, tripping over one of their legs. They scared the shit out of me, and I scared the shit out of them. When I hit the guy's leg, I startled him. He kinda jumped up, knocking the blind off for the big reveal. The guy that was on his knees has a dick in hand, apparently blowing the other guy that was up against the tree. Now the guy on his knees is looking at me dead in the eyes with a look of, "What the fuck? Who are you? Aw fuck, I'm caught." My sight is going back and forth from Hunter, Dick, Hunter, Dick, Hunter. The guy standing yells at me, "What the fuck are you doing, man?" They scramble, one trying to stand up and the other pulling his pants up, all the while both fighting the fucking blind that's wrapped in between them. Me in disbelief of what I just came up on, just stood there for what felt like forever. I stumbled over my words and find an apology and blurred out, "Nothing, guys. Sorry, man. Have fun," and turned back to my camp in an almost run. They yelled out to me to stop, but I didn't. Fucking longest 200-yard sprint ever. Got back to the camp. My wife looked at me and instantly knew something had happened and asked what was up. I told her to grab her stuff and we hurried out there without a word. About half an hour later of sprint hiking, we had to stop. So we took a spur trail to break, snack, and tell her what happened. She told me that she was worried and that I scared her. She was scared the whole time, thinking I had been chased by a bear or cougar or something and it was after us. I told her nothing like that it was just two hunters hiding out blowing each other. We talked a bit about it. She asked if I thought they'd look for us. I told her I didn't think so, that they probably left after being caught. If they were upset, yeah, they yelled at me, wanting to know what the fuck I was doing. If we should just make it back to the car and leave. No, let's just wait them out, just in case they're there at the trailhead waiting. Like I said, we've been out for 2 weeks now, and we've been making our way back and are less than a day's hike from the trailhead at this point. So they must have gone out after being caught, right? After a while of talking it over, we kinda just chuckled it off and hiked on the creek where we are going to camp for the night. We made camp off the trail in a nice outcrop with no incident. Next morning we wake up, break camp, do our morning routine and hike out to the trailhead. With that, we're not really thinking about the two hunters anymore. Well, as we get to the trailhead, we meet two ladies that had been prepping breakfast and are now cleaning up. As we're walking to the parking lot, they chat us up with the usual backcountry questions of how long we've been out, how many miles did we do, did we see any bears, what did we eat, and almost at the same time, one lady offered up some of their leftover food, as the other gal yells, "Hey hubby, these two have been hiking up on the same trail as you and so-and-so were just out on yesterday, but they were out for 2 weeks. Bring them some real food and juice." Hubby pokes his head out of the camper to say hi. Lo and behold, it's the fucking hunter who was against the tree. His smile faded as quick as his face turned white, then to an angry look when he realized who he was looking at. Then his buddy the giver turns the damn corner from the trailer to see me standing there. I feel the blood drain from my body and this guy's face turns from happy-go-lucky to disbelief and fear at the sight of me. The wives asked if we happened on their husbands out there, as they were out scouting for game yesterday. As I'm stumbling my words, they're darting looks from me to themselves. Before I can say anything, my wife answers, "Yes, we left some real food. No, we hadn't seen anyone. You guys are the first in 2 weeks." My wife turns to the hunters and says, "You guys must have had a really good hiding spot. Cheese and fucking rice." I think both hunters and me had a mini heart attack. One of the guys just gives a nod. My wife and I graciously take their pancakes and fucking sausage of all goddamn things. I see both hunters quietly talking to each other and staring over at me every once in a while. I'm doing my best to avoid the situation by packing up the car, while my wife is thanking the hunters' wives for the food. Both fucking hunters, with sidearms on their hips, come up to me with a beer. The one that was on the tree kinda pushed it to my chest and asked if I'd seen anything out there. My heart freaking stopped. I stumbled again over my words. Other than, some wild animals. Nothing worth writing home about. Yeah, we didn't see much either, but we really are surprised you didn't hear us last night, walking through your camp. Be careful. You never know what can happen out there in the middle of the woods. A few seconds later, the other one just smirks and they try to leave with a, "Have a safe trip home." I wasn't sure what was gonna happen in that moment, so I was psyching myself for a fight. I was kinda shaken up as we were leaving the trailhead. My wife asked if I was okay if those were the guys I'd seen. My reply was, "Yeah, what the fuck do you think, babe?" And then asked what they said to me. I told her I thought I was gonna have to fight them, but that they just gave me a beer to buy my silence. But I didn't mention the passive-aggressive threat they made about walking through our camp. She was dead and I didn't even know it. About 5 years ago, I was living at home with my parents. My twin brother was there too. Every morning at about 7 a.m., we would both head out for a run. We had mapped out this giant loop that we would run. To make it a bit of a competition, I would run it in one direction, and my twin would run it in the other. That way we could run and stay focused. Part of this loop was on the main street of the city my parents live in.
On this main road, there were these shady apartments kind of hidden by a bunch of trees. The direction I was running, the view of these apartments was obscured by a giant hedge bush, and I couldn't see the apartments until I was right in front of them. Out of my peripherals, I see a woman standing amongst the trees, staring at me. I immediately get the chills and do not turn to face her, because I didn't want to be rude. So I run on and forget about this a few minutes later. I pass my twin about 10 minutes later, and he's going in the opposite direction as I. I get home and my twin isn't back yet, so I go about the rest of my morning routine, including taking a shower. I get out of the shower and my twin hasn't come back yet, and I'm starting to get a bit worried. An hour after I had gotten home, he's still not back and I call him. He tells me he's on his way back, and he has something he needs to tell me and my parents. He finally gets home and tells us that as he's running in front of these apartments, he saw a woman hanging from the trees in front of this apartment. As soon as it's obvious he'd seen her, a man comes sprinting from the apartments wailing and screaming, "No, I can't believe she did this," and grabs her body and lays her on the ground and starts performing CPR. It's obvious he's her husband. My brother calls the local police and they dispatch an ambulance and police officers. My brother has to stay for questioning and a witness report and all that jazz. He's obviously troubled by it. Since he was going the opposite way I was running, he didn't have a hedge obscuring his view and got a straight view of this woman hanging there. It's still hard for me to believe that the woman I saw staring at me out of my peripherals was dead the entire time. I do find it very sketchy that the husband came out running as soon as it was obvious that someone had discovered the body. That is a bit too convenient if you ask me, but I don't want to say this man killed his wife without any evidence. My brother is never followed up by the police, leading me to believe that the death was ruled a suicide. I just still can't fathom that if I would have turned to face this woman, I would have discovered her about 20 minutes earlier than my twin, and it deeply troubles me that I didn't. My girlfriend and I might be being stalked. Hey Reddit, I'm a long-time user, but due to the nature of the situation, I decided to use a throwaway. Trigger warning for baby death, abuse, stalking, etc. Also apologies if this isn't the right sub. We just need answers. My girlfriend's mother is a long-time heroin user and has been in and out of jail for my girlfriend's whole life. When she lived with her mother and her mother's husband, she witnessed physical abuse and drug activity. She was forced to move out at a very young age in order to stay alive. She thought her mother was finally clean when her mother announced her pregnancy. After getting over the initial shock, the girlfriend decided to be supportive of her mother since she thought she was clean. That was until her mother overdosed while pregnant. She decided to cut all contact at that point. My girlfriend is also a mandated reporter, and last year reported her mother and her mother's husband to the state since she knew it wasn't a safe situation for the baby. The baby died in their house not even a month after birth due to an overdose with signs of physical abuse. My girlfriend's mother was arrested for the murder of the baby and other charges. Her husband was arrested for child endangerment and other charges very recently. At first, the judge did not grant either of them bail. Eventually, her husband was granted bail, which he posted. We did not know this until recently, which helped us put some of the pieces together. My girlfriend and I like to sit outside her house in the car and just chat or listen to music. Recently, there have been black cars around my girlfriend's house. She's also frequently followed by black cars when she drives home. It's the same couple of black cars that do this. They're not just random ones. At first, we thought we were just paranoid, since everyone was still in jail. But when we found out that the husband was out of jail, we began to doubt our insanity. The first major thing happened after my girlfriend and I went on a dinner date. We got home after dark and sat in the car for about 45 minutes before we noticed the same black car passing by us every few minutes. After 10 minutes of that, a different car drove towards us, flicking its high beams on when it got close enough for us to see who was inside. It swerved into the oncoming lane, and I genuinely thought that it was going to hit the passenger side of the car. It sped away and we ran inside. After that, we started to notice the black cars more and more. This past Wednesday morning, around 3 a.m.-ish, the same distinct black van that we had been seeing pulled up outside my house. This was weird, because my girlfriend and I live about 30 minutes from each other, in 2 separate cities. A man got out of the van and shined a flashlight through my yard, scanning it almost. He shined the flashlight up at the window I was sitting at, kept it there for a second, then walked 30 feet to an empty driveway, scanned around there for 20 seconds before getting in the van and peeling away. The windows were ice covered and frozen, so I couldn't make out the specifics of the van, but it was strange. A few nights later, my girlfriend and I spent some time hanging out in the car when we spotted a black van hiding behind another parked car further up the street. We could only see one headlight, but it creeped us out as we sat in the car. My girlfriend lives between 2 dead-end streets. Think of a very blocky U. She lives between the 2 prongs. The van went up the first dead end, 4 ways on, and sat for a few minutes before turning around and driving almost into the other lane of traffic to get close to us. It then went up the other dead end and stayed put. We thought it was weird that the van didn't just back out of the first dead end, instead of opting to drive all the way up the narrow street and turn around. After a few minutes, we call our friend and recount the story, just to get an extra opinion.
While my girlfriend and I were talking to our friend, I got out of the car for a cigarette and see how far the van was. I walked up the dead end that the van was on for about 15 feet before getting the worst gut feeling I've ever gotten. Across the street from me was a black mass, which was darker than the darkness around it. I decided to turn around and rush my girlfriend into the house. Later that night, we heard a bang coming from downstairs, followed by what sounded like a boot on wooden stairs. We locked the bedroom door and sat against it with a baseball bat, hopeful to barricade it. A few minutes later, we heard a car door slam before the sound of tires squeezing and a car driving away. Our initial idea was that it maybe came from the TV, but we had paused it, and the TV in the next room is never loud enough to feel real. When I went downstairs an hour later to get water, there was nothing damaged or missing. We theorized that maybe it was the sound of the front door trying to be opened, even though it was deadbolted. My girlfriend's exterior wall doesn't face the road. It is, however, next to a private driveway, and sometimes we'll hear her grandparents' car door close, or the neighbors backing out. The next day I was shoveling the sidewalks at my girlfriend's house, and saw the same black Chevy Silverado with mud streaks on the tailgate. It circled the block about 4 times. I was able to see the silhouette of a man driving through the passenger side window. Each time it was the same man in the same truck. My girlfriend lives in a small town and we were able to catalog the neighborhood cars. The black van and the truck are abnormal. Our theory is that someone is trying to scare my girlfriend into not testifying, or flat out making sure neither of us ever have the ability to testify. We really just need more opinions. Are we just paranoid? Or is this something that we should actually be worried about? Do you think these are just weird coincidences? The man in my attic. So I have lived in my own home for about 2 years now. I have a very small bungalow I'm able to pretty comfortably afford. In this bungalow, I have an attic area. At a guess, I'd say it's about 5 by 5 meters in size, and you can only really stand in the very center. Anyway, I work the night shift at a factory, so I usually get in at around 8 a.m. I was coming home last Thursday during a heavy storm, and I got into the house and just went to sleep. When I woke up, I went to my phone and saw that I was so tired, I didn't check my notifications. I have a Ring camera outside my door, which shows me anyone who would have come to my room. I saw that it had been tripped at 7:42 a.m. I checked the video and saw that it was a man. He was pressed right up at the door and was fumbling around with the handle. He did this for about 10 seconds when he spotted the camera. Once he did, he very quickly scuttled away. This unsettled me, but didn't entirely creep me out or anything. I got up to make some food and discovered something in my kitchen. My back window was open. I of course instantly began having thoughts of a home intruder, but slowly chilled out as I convinced myself I may have left it open. The rest of the day consisted of this, just noticing small things that didn't seem right and scaring myself, all up until a point. I left for the shift at 10 p.m. and I was watching some TV at 9 o'clock-ish. I spotted something that made my heart leap into my throat. Out of the corner of my eye, I could see it. My attic entrance was slowly being slid open. I can so vividly remember that I began questioning my sanity. Surely I was just hallucinating or something. I looked over at it and absolutely saw something that made me so much more scared. I saw fingers wrap around the hatch and began moving it more. I didn't know what to do. I could feel the panic beginning to really get to me, and I wasn't sure if I should leave the house and call the police, or if I should try to yell on whoever was up there. I chose a mixture of both. I began dialing 999 and ran to my bedroom where I could lock the door. As soon as I began running, I heard the hatch get almost teared off at the speed they moved it, and I arrived at my bedroom door. I looked down the corridor and watched for a second, seeing only a little slice of blackness in my attic, and I saw the human hand still holding onto the sides of my ceiling. I yelled, "Whoever is there, I'm calling the police and I have a gun. If you take a step out there, I'll fucking shoot you." The adrenaline was really making my hands and voice shake, but I tried sounding as tough as I could. Then I saw something I truly didn't think I will ever forget. His hand slipped back into the dark, and then he dropped down. I slammed my door shut and locked it as quickly as I could. The call went through and I was able to get online with the police, and they dispatched officers to my house. I told them I didn't know if the man was armed or not, and the dispatcher told me to stay on the line. I heard the man walking up to my door and rattling the door handle. He also seemingly went through my cupboards in my kitchen, as I heard a lot of commotion there. Truth be told, I don't know why he stayed. I would have just left the house, but he stayed right up until the police came in and arrested him. Apparently he was a homeless man and was armed with a knife from my kitchen, and had recently been seen in the area trying to get into other houses. Truth be told, I'm very frightened to sleep still. I now sleep with my bedroom door locked and all my windows closed. I also sleep with a knife under my pillow. I know that this is unlikely to ever happen again, but I just can't forget the way he dropped down from my attic. So that's the story of the scariest thing that's ever happened to me. I made this account to tell it, because I feel like if I write it down, it'll feel less like a real thing and more like just a story. Something bad happened while I was camping. I'm just not sure what. I'm not sure if I'm in the right place, but I've held this story in for the last 6 years because it sounds crazy and I got told not to talk about it. I went camping 6 years ago with a now ex-boyfriend of mine. The campsite we picked was beautiful. We were able to drive in through some rough trails. The spot we picked was next to some hiking trails that weren't very far off from some natural hot springs and a huge waterfall. We were in the middle of nowhere. Absolutely no one was around. We set up camp next to the car, went hiking, soaked in the hot springs, came back and had dinner. It was all very normal until we woke up the next day. I need to give some context as to how we slept that night so you can understand my confusion. Before we went to sleep, I put our food cooler and the cereal we brought in the car and locked it. I put the keys in the front pocket of my backpack and put the backpack next to my sleeping bag on the far side of the tent, away from the door of the tent. My boyfriend at the time slept nearest the door of the tent with a gun next to him. We woke up the next morning and felt fine. I slept hard, and from the inside of the tent, everything seemed normal. When we got out, our campsite was absolute chaos. The fire pit we made was ruined. The cooler had been thrown and food was scattered all over the place. The stereo was smashed to pieces and laying next to me. All of the car doors were open, including the trunk. We sat there for a minute in silence, just taking everything in. The woods felt off now. It was quiet, and not the beautiful campsite I saw yesterday. Everything about these woods felt wrong now. My ex accused me of not locking the car the night before, and that an animal got in our stuff. I promised that I locked it, and went to the tent to grab my keys from my backpack, but they weren't there. I found them later on the ground next to the car. We quickly threw everything in the trunk and left. My boyfriend was quiet and wouldn't talk to me about what just happened. He finally spoke up when we were almost home, and told me that he had a dream the night before about something kneeling over him in the tent and holding his gun just staring at him. When I tried to ask him more questions, he got quiet again and said he didn't want to talk about it, and that I shouldn't talk about it anymore either. I've tried to forget about it, but I just can't. Something really wrong happened to us in the woods that night.
Out of gas. Okay, here's my obligatory I lurk here all the time thing. I read this subreddit quite a bit. I've thought a lot about submitting my own experience, and now I finally am. In retrospect, things turned out fine, but it was really alarming for me at the time. I grew up in an extremely rural Midwestern state. My family lived in the country between two small towns. I had attended school in both small towns, and knew most of the families in the area either by face or last name. One night, it was about 10 or 11, and I was leaving a high school basketball game in Town A. I was about 15, and driving on my school permit past curfew. I had borrowed my uncle's car, an early 90s Toyota, with a leak in the gas tank that caused me to run out of gas before I made it home, more than 5 or 6 miles out of town, and I had about 7 left to go. I was on a long stretch of road that served as a shortcut between two main highways in the aforementioned towns, and wasn't heavily traveled. There were a few houses, but they were stretched far apart, and at the time, cell phone reception was very spotty. I waited for a while, and finally a nice, newer red truck with an extended cab, a toolbox in the back, and a construction company logo on the side pulled up. It was a Friday or Saturday night, and there was a man inside with a woman and 2 girls. He offered me his cell phone. I remember noticing it was a track phone, which my friends and I referred to at the time as crack phones, because you can't trace the owners and they're frequently used by drug addicts. They're also used a lot by people who can't afford a standard phone plan. The family was driving a really nice vehicle, and they seemed super clean cut, so it struck me as odd. The phone got no reception. I tried calling my parents a few times and finally gave up. The truck had been heading away from Town B towards Town A, where I had just come from, so when they offered me a ride, I thought nothing of it. I had a gas can in the truck and all my friends lived in Town A, so I figured they could drop me off at the gas station on the way to their destination, and I could find a ride back with somebody I knew. When I got in the car, I was caught off guard by the way the woman and the 2 girls were dressed. Conservative families, even Amish and Mennonites aren't common where I'm from, but for the man being otherwise modern, wearing jeans, driving a sort of flashy truck, and owning a cell phone, the females' clothing surprised me. They all wore long, heavy skirts and button-up blouses, with thin bonnets on their heads. One of the girls seemed to have a disability and made grunting noises every so often. Other than her noises, the women were completely silent. Everything seemed fine to me until the man driving turned around and started driving the opposite way of the direction he had been driving. The closest town was the other way and still 15 or more miles, and it seemed out of his way. Out of politeness, I reminded him that I'd come from Town A, knew everyone there, I could find a ride home. It was late and I figured he needed to get his family to where they were going. That's when he told me that he was from Town B, and that he had a full gas can waiting at his house, and that he could take me and bring me back to my car to fill it up. Still trying to be polite, I told him it was unnecessary, and my house was on the way to Town B, just a few miles away, and he could drop me off there. He didn't reply. I started to feel like something was off. I'm from an area where people go out of their way to help others, but it seemed like too much. I had insisted numerous times that he didn't have to drive nearly 30 miles out of his way to get me gas.
He could simply drop me off on his way to his destination, or if he wanted to make sure I made it home fine, he could drop me off at home. In my uneasiness, I started to make small talk. I asked him his name, and his last name was unfamiliar to me, which was surprising, but not totally unbelievable, coming from a town of around 3,000 people where I had spent the first decade of my life, and where both my parents still worked. I remember wishing that I had paid attention to the construction company name on the side of the truck, since most companies in my area were named after a family. As we got closer to the turnoff to my house, I started to get more frantic. I realized that these people, who didn't even seem overly friendly, were insisting that we drive completely out of the way, late at night, in a rural community, to fix a fairly common mishap. I had no idea who they were. I had never seen them before. I had no cell phone reception, and their cell phone was undetectable. Even if it wasn't what they were trying to do, making me disappear would be a pretty easy task. I started kind of shrieking that they just dropped me off at my house, but nobody in the car seemed like they heard me. Finally, in a fit of panic, I screamed at the top of my voice, "This is my turn. Take me home, please. Take me home right now." Finally, for the first time, the wife spoke up, yelling at the man angrily and somewhat annoyed, "Just fucking take her home." Outside of the girl's grunting, the car fell silent. He swerved angrily onto my road, pulled into my driveway, let me out, and then reversed out of the driveway so fast that his tires spit gravel, and I couldn't even see the license plate or the name of the company through the dust. I ran inside and woke up my parents to tell them what happened. They just yelled at me because I was driving past curfew. I don't know for sure what their intentions were. Maybe they just wanted to help, but I felt really uneasy the whole time. Not as scary as some stuff on here, but that's my experience. The office in the middle of nowhere. When I was 19, I worked for a company that allocated labor to rural areas in Australia. Basically, what you did was tell them where you were available, and they'd send you to a remote farm for a few weeks, where you'd do whatever they needed done. It was hard work and long hours, but good pay and good fun if you got in with a nice group of workers. When this occurred, I was working on a large property, about 9 hours from Sydney City, and the property itself was 40 minutes from the nearest town. In short, it was in the middle of nowhere. I was working at a farm clearing bushland with 3 other guys my age from the city. Our boss was a guy named Jeremy, who owned the farm and supervised us while helping out with the work. He was pretty laid back, and generally really good to us. This summer in particular was very hot, and the work was hard. So one day when the temperature hit about 30 degrees Celsius, or 100 degrees Fahrenheit, Jeremy decided to give us the afternoon off. He said he knew a waterhole on the farm about a 25-minute drive north. I was keen for a swim, but the other guys wanted to relax for the Arvo. So him and I hopped in one of the work trucks and started heading out across the property. It was mostly wide, empty expanses with a few clumps of scattered bushland. Jeremy wasn't much of a talker, so he drove more or less in silence. After about 20 minutes, however, he suddenly parked and jabbed me in the ribs. "Do you see that over there, beneath the 2 dead trees?" I should mention that if you're not familiar with inland areas, particularly those in Australia, they are brown or red, and mostly flat and bland, meaning any bright colors stick out like a sore thumb. So you can imagine our surprise when we could see a large blue angular structure far off in the distance. We steered in its direction, and as we got closer we realized it was a huge blue shipping container, just sitting in the middle of nowhere. Jeremy was perplexed. I asked him if he knew what it was, but he obviously didn't. He said he hadn't seen it when he drove through the same area about 5 weeks before, and he wanted to go see what it was. As we got closer, things got even more bizarre. There was a big diesel generator behind it thumping away, and a CCTV camera on each side, all motion activated so they buzzed from side to side, following us as we moved. I tried to reason with Jeremy, something along the lines of, "With all this security, someone obviously doesn't want us here. Let's just go." He brushed me off, however, reminding me that it was his farm, and whoever had put it here was trespassing, so he wanted to go inside. Despite all the surveillance, there was only a small padlock on the huge door. He had some bolt cutters in his toolbox, and after a bit of a struggle, we broke the lock and went inside. The first thing I noticed was the rush of cold air as we got in. The place was air-conditioned, which I must admit was quite pleasant on such a hot day. We searched around for a light switch, but I could already see it was some sort of IT setup. There were flashing LEDs all around the place and the sort of hum you hear when the hard drives are working hard. When we finally switched on the lights, we could see a sophisticated office setup. There were hard drives the size of bar fridges, and other computer equipment lining the walls, sometimes piled 2 or 3 high, and plastic storage boxes scattered around the far wall with several desks with a computer monitor arranged in the middle, complete with rolling office chairs. At this stage, I felt like I was in one of those nonsensical dreams. This made absolutely no sense. We wandered into the middle and sat down at the desk to see if the computers could give us any idea of what the hell was going on here. My heart was racing and I just wanted to bolt. We had been seen by the CCTV, so if anyone was monitoring, they already knew we were here. Jeremy, on the other, was adamant that we get to the bottom of this, so I put on a brave face and started looking through the computer. This went on for a while, but in short, neither of us had a very high grasp of technology outside of Facebook and Microsoft Word. The best I can describe it from my lay position is that it was an endless list of computer talk. It was like the old Napster or LimeWire download screens looked like, just constantly picking up and receiving data, then recording it onto several windows. I gave up on the computers and walked cautiously over to the far end of the container to the big pile of storage boxes. By then I was pretty sure no one else was there, as there was nowhere to hide really, but I was still incredibly on edge. I decided against my better judgment to see what's inside all these boxes. My brief sift through these boxes still makes me sick to the stomach. It didn't take long for me to realize that the box was full of posters, DVDs, and photos, all of hardcore CP. One thing that still gets to me is that it was all neatly organized into folders and smaller boxes. These people were organized. I immediately recoiled, jumped up and ran over to Jeremy. I could hardly string a sentence together. I said something to the effect of, "Mate, get out. CP. Go. Get the fuck up." I dragged him out, composed myself, and managed to explain what I saw. We jumped back into the truck and sped back to the house. The farm had no cell phone reception, and we hadn't bought satellite phones, so we had to get back to the landline to call the police. Once we called them, they still had to make it all the way to the farm from the nearest police station, which was in a town about a half hour from the town closest to the farm. We waited, talking frantically about what we'd seen, until the cops arrived almost an hour later. They arrived with 2 four-wheel drives, and we jumped in and led them back. This is where it gets worse. By the time we got back, the container door was open and there was a fire inside. We had only 2 small extinguishers in the car, and these did very little. The fire department took about an hour to get there, by which stage most of the damage was done. An arson report by the federal police found almost no evidence of the computer equipment described, and only traces of paper and cardboard. This means that whoever ran it knew we were there, and had time to come and remove most of it and get away. There were various ways to get off the property, and the landmass was huge, so there was no real way to tell them, since the police hadn't taken us all too seriously in the first instance, probably due to our poor explanation on the phone. Aerial surveillance was also impossible by the time we had pieced it all together. I took a keen interest in following it up, but with no real evidence of who might be responsible, the investigation went cold. I kept in contact with Jeremy, and the shipping container is still there on the farm, as it's too expensive to move. I'll never forget what I saw in those boxes. Stranger under the bed. I am 22, and this incident happened a year and a half ago. I had just moved into my first apartment and was in the process of moving in. The door that led into my apartment locks itself automatically when closed, so I was going to the entrance of the apartment complex to get my mail. While talking on the phone with my boyfriend, I returned to my apartment and sat on the bed, while opening the mail and using the phone. I dropped the phone on the floor and it landed under the bed, so I had to lie on the floor and stretch for it. I saw something that caught my eye. There was someone under my bed. My eyes widened and I choked the urge to scream. The person under my bed was lying still with his back towards me, and his head to his chest, so I couldn't see his face, and he didn't see me. Trying to be rational while so many thoughts rushed through my head, I picked up the phone and said, "Sorry, I dropped my phone. I'm just gonna take a shower and call you back." The bathroom is right by my bed, so I hastily walked in, quietly locked the door, turned the shower on, jumped out my window and called the police. They told me to wait nearby but go across the street to see if anyone comes out the door to the apartment complex. This was during the summer and it was still light out. I placed myself across the street hiding behind a car while watching my open bathroom window and entry door. I called my boyfriend and he came to me just before the police. I gave them my keys and they went inside. Only moments later, 2 cops came out holding a thin and tired looking man. His eyes looked crazy, but he didn't try to get away. The policeman that stood beside me and comforted me while the police searched through my house told me that the man stood outside my door with one of my kitchen knives waiting for me to come out. This man had somehow crept in my entry door while I was getting my mail and hid under the bed. The man that was trying to hurt me turned out to be a homeless person and was placed in a mental hospital. My boyfriend moved in with me the very next day. Welcome to the Hotel CaliNOPE. Alright, this is an essay, but a lot happens. Bear with me. My next door neighbor's parents moved from India to the UK back in the 60s. After retiring, they made a habit of heading back there every year to visit family and friends, ultimately spending about half their time traveling through India and half their time here. Long story short, one year they invited my family along. I was 15, and I thought I was some badass Viking rock prince because I had long blonde hair and red kerrang. Fun fact, curly hair ruins everything. I look like a fucking cherub. Now, my neighbor's dad had planned this holiday like it's a military campaign. When we arrive, he hands each of us a brown folder containing our itinerary, hotel brochures, money conversion charts, train timetables, 4 passport photos of ourselves for forms, and a list of names under the header useful people. Forget Viking rock prints. I'm James fucking Bond. Other than the fact that I'm mistaken for a girl on several occasions, I have an amazing time. Until we rock up to this huge hotel in the middle of the jungle. Honestly, the arse end of nowhere. The nearest village is a 3-hour drive down a dirt road. Just before sunset, in the fucking jungle. I pull out the brochure. It'd be safe to say that this place is under new management. There's a single light on about 5 stories up. As we pull up to the driveway, we spot a group of men cluttered around a large fire. One of them stands and starts shouting something, but is silenced by the guy next to him with a slap to the back of his head. One of the group comes sauntering over and motions our driver to wind down the window. Imagine Alfred Hitchcock as an Indian drug lord, and you'll have a pretty good idea of the man now flapping his jowls through our window. He peers into the back, spots us, and cracks the dictionary definition of a shit-eating grin. In broken English, he welcomes us to the hotel, glances over at our reservations, and ushers us into the lobby. This is when shit gets really weird. The place is deserted. Not the staff have gone to bed deserted. It's like whoever was here fucking noped out of this place in a hurry deserted. There were toppled chairs in the lobby. Hitchcock tells us that our rooms aren't ready and offers us some food while we wait. The dining room is huge, empty, and our order is taken by a boy no older than 9, who promptly vanishes closing the doors behind him. We hear a motorcycle engine outside, and an hour later something vaguely resembling our order appears on a variety of mismatched dinnerware. No idea where any of it came from. At this point, we were all pretty unnerved, and everyone started making lame jokes to ease the tension. We were only there for one night. Everything had been paid in advance, and we were a large group, with 2 people who spoke Hindi and Konkani, so felt pretty sure we could deal with any weirdness. Hitchcock waddles in and takes us to our rooms. Every one of them is stripped bare, apart from the bed and the bedside tables. Exposed wires poke out of the walls where you'd expect a TV or phone, and there are rectangular patches of discolored wallpaper, suggesting that someone finally took a stand against terrible hotel artwork. The only decoration is this creepy little metal horse that is just sitting on one of the bedside tables. I'm sharing with my little bro, and insist on taking the bed closest to the door, presumably thinking that I could summon Thor if things got hairy. Hitchcock lingers in our doorway for a while, flashing his pearly browns and giving me the R-word eyes. I close the door on him. We dump our bags, check if the door is locked, and have bro chats until we pass out. I wake up to hear the door to my room clicking shut. The door that is no farther than a foot from my bed. Fuck that. I'm no Viking rock prince. I'm a flying baby that plays a harp. I cower under the seemingly clean blankets until my heart stops threatening to burst out of my ribs and redecorate the ceiling. Stealthily ninja roll out of the bed into the door. The bastard is unlocked. Fuck this. Barricade that shit with a bedside table. Check little bro is alive. Get into bed. See our bags. Add them to the barricade. Notice that mine is open. Fuck everything. Nothing is missing. Camera, wallet, clothes, super secret spy dossier. Everything is intact. I convince myself that I shat my pants over nothing and go back to sleep. Side note, little bro slept through the whole thing. Morning comes and we all want to get out of there as soon as possible. Neighbor's dad kicks off how weird the whole thing is to Hitchcock and gets half of our money back. Excellent. We head outside and my sister points out the charred remains of one of the hotel beds and what's left of a fire pit. Excellent. Turns out that our driver, who had a room in the place, had decided to sleep in the bus because he didn't want their funny business. Apparently there were people coming and going all night. He woke up to see a guy, nose against the window, just staring at him. Driver hit the window and the dude scampered off into the jungle like fucking Mowgli. We give the driver an extra huge tip. Hitchcock waves at us from the lobby, adjusts his crotch, and plots back in. We leave thinking the weirdness is over. About an hour into the journey, I decide to take a look at our itinerary, so I pull out my spy folder. My heart instantly sinks. One of my passport photos is gone. A perfect 35 by 45mm rectangle, missing from the corner. 3 little Viking rock sheriffs stare up at me, mourning their fallen brother. I search the folder and ask my parents if they took it for something. Starting to lose my shit. Everything from the night before rushes back. I explain what happened, and there's this weird moment of silence while everyone looks at each other. Turns out that everyone heard something outside of their door at some point during the night, but had deadbolted them before going to sleep. Bro and I had no deadbolt. Hitchcock put us in that fucking room on purpose. Driver suggests that we head back to the hotel and demand satisfaction. Tips galore for the driver. We arrive at the hotel. The doors are padlocked, and Hitchcock and his cronies have vanished. The cherry on top of this mindfuck cake is the horse. The little metal horse that sat on our bedside table has been placed on the step in front of the doors. I took it. Free souvenir. Fuck you, Hitchcock. I know that a lot of you are gonna want to see the creepy little fucker, but I don't have it where I'm living at the moment. I pinky promise I'll post a photo when I go home for Christmas. First things first, I'm so sorry. I can only imagine the heartbreak and disappointment you felt on Christmas morning as you raced downstairs, ignored all your presents and loved ones, and flung yourselves in front of the computer ready to revel in the malicious majesty of Kripona.
Stalker horse. Long story short, my iPad died, and then my dog died, and then every train service in the UK died. It's been a long festive season. Fuck this shit, where's the horse? Everyone. I'm glad you asked. Right here. His brother's house. I've been lurking on this subreddit for about a week, and I finally decided to post my experience. I'm from a small town in Appalachia with a population of less than 7,000. There were about 80 people in my high school class, and people are generally very trusting. This story took place early last September, so it would have been a little less than a year ago. I was a 20-year-old male at the time, and I just entered my junior year in college. In high school, I had a close cohort of friends. There were about 8 of us that were very close. As things go, things changed and we went on to our respective colleges. I fell out of touch with many of them, but I did retain contact with a couple of them. The ones featuring in this story are Mac and Devin. Last September, I got a call from my mother telling me the news. Devin's father had been killed in an accident on his way to work. It was a sudden brutal collision involving a semi. Devin's family was not from the area. They had moved to my town during high school because their father had gotten a job there. Having no family and a dispersed set of friends, she didn't have many people to lean on during this time. Mac contacted me and wanted to know whether I planned on attending the funeral, which had been planned for Friday morning. I had an important class Friday afternoon, but I told him that I could come up that evening and we could occupy Devin. Mac made the 6-hour drive from his college to attend the funeral, and I made it into town later that evening. We decided that the 3 of us would spend a few hours at Mac's house. We were just going to hang out, and Mac and I were determined to preoccupy Devin. I got there around 6 and we jumped right into it. We talked about college, we watched Netflix, and we played board games. Despite the circumstances, it was a pretty good night. I got up to leave about a half hour after midnight. After some tearful goodbyes, I got in my car. Now for a little geography. Mac's house is a little more than a mile from my parents' house. There are no red lights and 1 stop sign. At the time of night, I could make the trip in less than 2 minutes. Being in a rural part of Appalachia though, the roads were far from straight. In fact, Mac's house was just off a winding 2-lane road. There were several blind curves that would stop you from seeing what's coming up ahead, and there are no guardrails or streetlights to speak of. So I start off on what I thought would be a brief, uneventful journey home. I just pull out of his driveway and start on my way. I start onto the first blind curve and I'm greeted by something entirely unexpected. I see the car first. It's a white older model sedan. It is in half my lane and half the culvert. I have to swerve to avoid hitting it, and I notice a figure waving his arms as I slam on the brakes. I end up stopped on the side of the road. There's no shoulder, so my car is sitting in the road and in the grass about 100 feet past his car. At this point, I should have kept going and called the police for help when I got home, but this is not what I did. I avoided that feeling in my gut, put my car in park and opened the door. I stepped outside and immediately noticed the damage to the vehicle. The front end had serious damage. There were no other cars around, so I concluded the driver must have collided with the cliffside on the other side of the road. It is really dark though, so I have a hard time figuring out what happened. By the red light emitted by my taillights, I see the figure approaching me. "Hey, buddy, I need some help." "What happened? Is there someone you'd like me to call?" "No, I tried to call my brother, but he didn't answer. He lives just up the road." "Oh, do you want me to call the police?" "No, you can't call the police. I just need my car pulled out of there." He points to the culvert. "I need someone with a truck. My brother has one." He's walking closer to me, and I'm beginning to make out some of his features. He's a little bit shorter than me, but he easily has 75 pounds on me. At this point, the little light left me unable to discern much else, except that he was wearing a baseball cap. "Well, I don't have a truck, so I guess I can't help you." I was beginning to feel very uncomfortable. He kept approaching me, and there was something wrong in his voice. The flatness, like he was not emotional at all about the predicament he was in. I started to walk backwards towards my car door. "Drive me to my brother's house. He lives just up the road." He points in the opposite direction of my home as he walks towards my passenger side. "I have to get home. My family is expecting me." This is a lie. They have been asleep for hours, and I was still at Mac's house for all they knew. "It'll just take a minute. He lives on Road. His house is only about a mile away." He keeps progressing. My heart is racing, but I am in a strange predicament. I want to get the hell out of there, but there isn't an ideal way to do it. My car doors are unlocked, and he was getting very close to my car. Being as fast as possible, I couldn't get in and lock the door before he opened the door on the other side. I certainly couldn't put it in drive and pull away before he had at least some of himself in my passenger seat. Seeing as how he was going to get into my car if he wanted to, I decided to go the cordial route. If this was going to happen, it was going to be on my terms. I knew Road. My sister's boyfriend lived there, and I knew that it was less than a mile from where I currently sat. It was a 1-lane hauler,
as we colloquially refer to a hollow. Maybe he was telling the truth. Maybe I was about to do a good deed. Okay, get in. He sits down in my passenger seat about the time I make it to the driver's seat. Since the doors were open, my car's interior lights were on. This was the first good look I had at him. He was older than me, probably in his late 40s. He was dirty, very dirty. His hands were greasy, his shirt was full of holes, and there were literally flies congregating around him. My car instantly smelled like body odor and bodily fluids. I experienced immediate regret. This was a horrible idea. My parents taught me about this. My mother was a true crime junkie, and she would always warn about situations like this. He closes his doors and the lights go out. I make a U-turn and start heading toward Road. He insists on talking to me, although I much rather prefer the hum of the radio. He asked me my name, he asked me where I live, he asked me what I do. I evade every question I deem too personal, for I did not want him knowing too much about me. I begin to get the distinct feeling that something is wrong with him. He speaks void of emotion or any kind of reflection. Sometimes he has a hard time getting the words out. I conclude he's either on a mind-altering substance, or he is playing with less than a full deck of cards. We are turning on Road when he begins admiring my car. It is a fairly nice foreign car that my parents bought for my 16th birthday. He's rubbing the dashboard with his greasy hand before he starts pressing buttons. This is a nice car, a really nice car. I'd kill to have a car like this. I kid you not, he literally said he would kill for my car. I didn't immediately take it as a threat, as there was absolutely no emotion in that statement, and it is a common turn of phrase. Nevertheless, I was getting very uncomfortable. My sister's boyfriend's house is just barely in sight. I'm so worked up that I decide I'm going to stop there. I'm pretty sure I could get a few beats in on the door before the guy attacks me for not taking him to his brother's place. As I approach his driveway, my heart sinks. There are no cars there, and there isn't a garage. No one's home. I'm on my own. As we pass his driveway, he says something that catches me off guard. His house is about a mile up ahead. I thought his house was a mile from your car. No, it's a mile from here. Okay. I keep driving, but I look at my odometer. I'm giving him 1 mile. That's it. We drive in silence, for which I'm grateful. He's still fondling my dashboard, but I figure I can ignore that. We go about 3/4 of a mile further up this desolate hollow. When I ask him how much further, I think he can tell I'm getting irritated and scared. Just up that way. Turn right. I stop in the middle of the abandoned road. He's pointing to this gravel road on my right. It's barely wide enough for my car, and it shoots steeply up the mountain. He lives a mile up that road. Go that way. There's no way I was about to drive further into this desolate place when it seemed like he was making up directions as he went. There was no sign of life up there, and we had already gone further than he originally said. No, this is as far as we go, I say to him. Get out. No. Come on, man. We're almost there. Just turn up that way. I look around, and I have limited options when it comes to a weapon. In fact, I have one option. The previous winter had been a bad one, so I kept a brush and ice scraper combo in my floorboard. It was plastic, but decently heavy. The scraper part had a sharp edge. I casually pick it up and sit it in my lap. No, get out. He was very reluctant. My makeshift weapon and the fact that I was literally in the driver's seat caused him to swing his door open. The lights instantly came on, and he turned to look me squarely in the face. He was grinning, and his teeth looked as if he hadn't seen a dentist since before I was born. Please? This was the first time anything he said had any inflection at all. He said it as if he was trying to sound pitiful, but it came off as mocking. No, I said sternly, and began to get out of the car. He was in the process of closing the door when he said one more thing. He leaned into the open door and said, I really like your car. He slammed the door and I took off. It was a 1-lane road, so I couldn't immediately go the direction that I needed to. I went up a couple hundred feet and turned into someone's driveway. When I approached where I left him out, I see that he has made no progress up the gravel road towards his brother's house. In fact, it doesn't look like he's moved at all. I slow down when I get close to him. I don't want to risk the man jumping in front of me or anything. He stares at me as I pass and I floor it. As I drive away, I can barely make out that he started to walk. Not up to the mountain, not further into the hollow, but towards the way I had driven, towards the main road. The wrecked car was still there when I drove by. I went straight home and laid in my bed, too terrified to sleep. I don't know what he had planned, but I'm pretty sure I wasn't driving him to his brother's house. One decision. When I was a teenager, I was goth. Black hair, black clothes, black makeup, even had a pair of combat boots. My friends and I, in typical goth fashion, hung out at the local cemetery. We started going as a joke, but soon discovered we liked the peace we found there. That all changed one night. My friend called to see if I wanted to hang out, and I did. None of our other friends were available. They were either working or recovering from partying the night before.
so we were on our own. My friend picked me up and we drove up to the cemetery. We were hanging out, smoking cigs, and BSing about the latest issues she was having with her boyfriend, when we noticed at the top of the hill we were on, about 100 feet away, a bonfire had been lit. You have to understand that this cemetery is about a block off campus of a major university, and it's not uncommon for college students to go there to party. My friend and I sighed, knowing that we would have to get going soon. It was illegal to be in the cemetery after dark, and we knew the police would show up because some jerks decided they needed a bonfire. We decided to finish our cigs and then take off. Just then, the most horrible stench came wafting down the hill from the direction of the bonfire. My friend gagged and covered her mouth. I groaned and said, "What the hell?" My friend shook her head, saying, "I don't know what they're doing. Let's just leave." We get in the car, and one of us suggested, I honestly don't remember who, maybe we should just go up there and see what they're doing. My stomach turned and a cold shiver went through my body. My friend must have had the same feeling because, at the same time, we both said, "No, we should leave." My friend turned the car on, switched on her headlights, put the car in reverse and looked over her shoulder before starting to back up. I was still looking up to the hill. A figure stepped in front of the bonfire. I could only see a silhouette, but I was sure whoever it was watching us. A feeling of terror hit me and I said, "Go, go, 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 go," getting louder and more panicked with each word. My friend looked, backed up to the hill for a second, and just as the figure took a step towards us, she slammed on the gas and peeled out, going in reverse down the hill. She rammed the gear shift into drive and we were out. We didn't say anything for a while, until she said, "What the hell were they burning?" I shook my head. I don't know. She dropped me off at my home and I went to bed. The next morning, I woke up and went to the kitchen. My mom was there drinking her morning coffee and I joined her. We talked about her job for a bit, and suddenly she comes out with, "Did you hear what happened last night?" I shrug and say no. I had just gotten up. She tells me that a woman she worked with was kidnapped from a parking garage. "Oh my God." I say, "Did they find her?" "Yes, but too late," she replies. "Whoever took her had raped her and murdered her. They found her this morning in the cemetery. He had tried to dispose of her body in a bonfire." I froze. My brain was going a mile a minute, the realization slowly creeping up. That's what the smell was. Needless to say, I never hung out at the cemetery at night again. I think back to our decision to leave instead of investigating the fire. That one decision could have changed everything. Dark silhouette in the bonfire? Let's not meet. Lost in Baltimore and saved by a lie. When I was 19 in the early 90s, my brother and his wife were newly married and living in Baltimore. I was from Maryland, but had not yet spent time in that city. I knew it wasn't totally safe in parts, but I also knew that I was just going straight to my brother and sister-in-law's house, so it would be fine. Until I turned onto the wrong street. This was MLK Boulevard, and back then, it was a stretch of abandoned gas stations, sketchy bars, boarded up houses, and a few people were walking in the middle of the street drinking out of paper bags. I knew that I had messed up, and I ended up freaking out and getting more lost. I pulled into an abandoned gas station. There was a bank of payphones, and I parked about 10 feet from them, hopped out, and called my brother. He was impatient at first, because he knew the city quite well, but it was my first time driving in it, and I was trying to write down his directions as he gave them to me. Just then, something caught my eye and I looked over at my car. 3 men were leaning against it, 2 on the passenger side, and 1 against the driver's side front door. They were all staring at me with their arms crossed. I started to silently cry, thankful that I had sunglasses on. My brother heard me sniffling and said, "Why are you upset? I'm giving you directions." But I couldn't tell him what was going on, as these men were within earshot. I got the rest of the directions, put them in my pocket, and walked to my car. The man leaning against my door reached up and wiped the tears from one cheek. Then he said, "Why are you crying, baby? Nothing bad has happened yet." Without even thinking about it, I responded, fully sobbing now. "I just shot my boyfriend, and I'm in a lot of trouble. The cops are..." That's all I got out. The 3 men had all taken off in separate directions at full sprints away from me. If I hadn't been gifted with that lie from my guardian angels, or whoever saved my ass that day, who knows what would have happened. Possible murderer / serial killer encounter in Maine. Not really sure how to begin this, and my title may make more sense after reading my experience. I'll try to be as brief and concise as possible. Summer of 2004. My family was supposed to vacation in Kennebunkport, Maine. My father was stuck in meetings, so he was going to come up from Manhattan a few days after us. My mom wanted to drive up. Super annoying to me at the time, but we didn't have a choice, and my brother,
sister, and I loaded into the car and started to drive. I was about 14 at the time. The drive was uneventful, but there were various delays, and we ended up getting in a lot later than originally planned. Because of this, the owners of the house we were renting had turned in for the night, and we weren't able to get a hold of them to get the keys. My mom, unfazed, decided she wanted lobster, so we went to one of our favorite spots. She called my dad to see if he could make us reservations at a hotel in New York while we ate. We were enjoying the lobster while a guy came up and started chatting with my mom. I figured it was just a friendly local making conversation. During this, my dad calls my mom, and my mom excuses herself to speak to him. Apparently, all hotels were booked for the night. Go figure. Height of vacation season in Kennebec Port. The plan was for us to drive to the nearest town and just find somewhere to stay until we could pick up the keys for our vacation home. Apparently, the local had been listening into my mom's conversation and came back over when she got off the phone. I want to say, there was nothing outwardly off about him. He was preppy, clean-cut, unassuming and fit in with the clientele. He told my mom he had a big home with a big guest house we were more than welcome to stay at, and his wife wouldn't mind. Immediately my reaction was F that. No way in the world I was staying in a dude's house in creepy Maine in the dark. My mom determines this guy was legit. She said he was in finance, and they chatted enough for my mom to determine he wasn't totally full of it. I talked to my dad hysterical. He said I was overreacting and that I needed to get out of the city more, and accept that sometimes people were just nice. So my brother, sister, and I got into our car and followed him back to his house. The guest house was really nice, fully furnished, but the beds were oddly placed. The guest house had 2 bedrooms, and instead of the beds being located in the middle/centered, they were right under the window in each room. Just seemed out of place. Anyways, fast forward, we're all getting ready to go to bed. My mom hears a knock at the door and it's the guy. He said he just wanted to make sure we got settled. Cool, nice thing to do. About 30 minutes later, he comes back to check in again. At this point, my mom was like, "Thanks, we're good. We'll stop by the house in the morning to say thank you." Fast forward another 30 to 45 minutes. I can't sleep. I'm terrified. We hear this rustling, which is odd because the guest house was nowhere around trees or close proximity to bushes that might cause such a noise. At this point, I see my mom wide awake and look at the window. Let me add, none of the windows had curtains. The guy said it's because his wife was in the process of redecorating. When I looked up, there was a male figure, just standing. I thought I was going to have a heart attack. I don't know how long he was there for. When he walked away, my mom waited a bit and then told us to get our stuff together. She wasn't messing around. We had my dad on the phone at this point. He was pretty much flipping out at my mom about something, but I didn't hear what. My mom said she was going to put stuff in the car and to follow her out. This was around 2 a.m. When we got into the car, we pulled around to the front of the main house, so my mom could return the key and say thanks and get the fuck out of there. However, when we got to the front, all the lights were off. Not just all the lights, but it looked like no one had been home. Porch light, table lamp in the front windows, everything black. Also, the 2 cars were gone. The local's car, and what we presumed to be his wife's car. After seeing this, my mom, at this point, was pretty unsettled. She said we were leaving and we proceeded to drive to the gate. The gate at the end of the driveway had been deadbolted and padlocked shut from the inside. It wasn't a super strong gate, so my dad said rev it. We were in a big SUV and just get out of there. We drove straight back to New York, not speaking the entire time. We have never returned back to Maine, and my parents refused to speak about it. I asked a family member one night about it when he was drunk, and all he said was, "They didn't tell you? The actual owners of the house were on vacation." I'm assuming my mom or dad followed up with local authorities and figured that out but never told us. I don't know who that man was or what he planned that evening. I was curious as to whether there were any known serial killers or murderers who were in the area at that time, whether traveling through, etc. Update. Hi everyone. I spoke with my mom and dad. They didn't have a ton of details and frankly didn't want to talk about it. But here's what they said. My mom, first, apologized because she knew it was a shitty situation and still thinks she's a horrible mother. She didn't have a ton of details, but here are a few high-level items. I asked her what made her suspect something was wrong, or what made her put her guard up. Essentially, she said given it was dark, and the longer the night went on, she realized it wasn't a great situation, and that she shouldn't have agreed to it. However, the point when things turned, so to say, was when the guy came back the second time. My mom said his demeanor had done a 180. When he came back to check in the second time, she felt something was off. She described it as being somewhat of an edge, both his attitude and tone of voice. She said he seemed anxious and annoyed, but was trying to come off as a concerned host, if that makes sense. She also said that he looked back at the main house a few times and wasn't really paying attention to her when she was saying, "Yes, everything's fine, thank you again," etc. All those signs put together made her realize something was off. The way she described it was, there was something beneath this exterior that was coming out, that I got a glimpse of and I didn't like it. With respect to the home, she said it seemed like it was being renovated. This might explain why it was unoccupied. She said when she drove in at first, she was just happy to find a place to settle in for the night after a long drive, so she wasn't paying attention to everything as she should have. However, when we were leaving, since she was more on edge and everything was heightened, she started to notice a few things. First, she said that it looked like the main house was definitely going through renovations or something of the like, that the exteriors were not that great, and what she saw didn't jive with how the guy described it initially. Neither she nor my father called the cops. She said in hindsight, she probably should have, but she was primarily concerned with getting out of there, and after we did, she began to rationalize it away. Like, come on, it's dark, you're freaking yourself out. Calm down. You're tired. It can't possibly be anything bad. You need to lay off the scary movies. Type of thought pattern. It wasn't until a period of time after that she realized she probably should have alerted authorities. Also, and this is the point I don't remember, apparently the home was a lot farther than she was led to believe it was going to be. This makes me think it was maybe not the main part of the town. I'm not great with geography, and at 14 years old I was definitely not great with it. And she didn't remember exactly where it was. She said she tried, but was focused on following him and wasn't paying attention to the streets exactly. With respect to what my cousin told me about the owners being on vacation, my dad said, "Your cousin is a drunk." Okay, that being besides the point, I pressed him a little bit. Apparently how my cousin walked away with that idea is because when my aunt, uncle, mom, and dad were talking about it one night, I guess someone floated the idea that maybe the owners were on vacation, and this person was house sitting for them. However, my mom and dad both believed that the house was either being renovated or the owners weren't there for whatever reason, and it was just vacant. I'm not sure these answers really answer anything, and frankly they make me feel worse about the whole situation than I did before. I think my parents felt horrible and extremely guilty, and just tried to bury this and move on. I, a pizza guy, intercepted a kidnapping during a delivery. I deliver pizza, and I'd been having a really busy night, non-stop back and forth, without any time to even pause or take a leak. I've been so busy and I wasn't really thinking about bathroom breaks, but we're also going through a bit of a heat wave in our area, so I've been drinking copious amounts of water. All of a sudden, as I was driving to this particular delivery, the urge to go hit me. Like things went from 0 to 60 in an instant. Thankfully, I was close to the customer, so I could get this one over with quickly, or so I thought. I pulled up to the house, and it was an area that I delivered in before, so I could immediately see that something wasn't right. All the lights were off in the house, not even the glow of a television or anything. It was extra apparent because the streetlight closest to the door happened to be out of order, and on top of all that, the block was dead quiet. It is a big university area, and obviously there aren't many student renters in July, but there had to be at least one person, because someone ordered this pizza. Maybe they just really liked sitting in the dark, or they were out in the backyard, whatever. I just didn't want to get out of my car and knock on a quiet house in the middle of the night, without first checking I had the correct address and the customer was inside. It was scorching that night, even after sundown. My car's AC is a joke, and the piping hot pizzas didn't help things much, so I have to try and open the door as infrequently as possible to keep the cool air in. I called the number the customer provided and the voice on the other end said, kind of brusquely and out of breath, "Yeah?" I just tried to keep it clear and concise. "Hey, it's your pizza out front, but there doesn't appear to be anybody home." And the customer replied, still gasping for air, "Yeah, I'm not home." I had to pee so badly by that point that I was much less patient than I otherwise be with a customer right out the gate. Well, then we're gonna have to terminate the order, because I've arrived in the stated delivery window, and you were supposed to pay in cash, so I don't know what to tell you. Plan ahead next time. I instantly regretted letting my bladder do the talking for me, as the voice on the other end came through more clearly as a young, bubbly, and very distraught girl who couldn't have been older than 20 or 25. "Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry, I was running down the street so I could barely hear you," she cried. "I just switched you out of my AirPods. Is that better? Sorry, I completely lost track of time at work, but I knew you were coming. That's why I'm literally running home right now. Please don't leave. I'm starving and I don't have a car. Seriously, please don't leave. 5 minutes tops, okay?" I know what it's like to be hungry and running late, and have no car but not live near any restaurants. Plus, when I heard her voice, I began to remember more specifically having delivered to this place a couple times before, and she'd always been perfectly nice. Now I felt bad for snapping at her. I tried to walk it back, while simultaneously looking out my window for potential spots to pee. No, my bad. I'm letting the heat get to me, and it's not your fault. No need to rush. See you when you get here. I hung up, and while surveilling the street was starting to think I was really out of luck. All the other houses had people in them, and were close together, so there were no clumps of trees or out-of-the-way patches of land or anything. Of course, I had just tossed my empty water bottle at the last delivery, because I'm an idiot. Finally, I decided it was escalating to the point of an emergency, and the safest bet was to use the bush in front of the woman's house. She wasn't home, and the streetlight was out so no one would see me. The people who were home were inside. My car was parked across the street, and we're a small shop who don't wear uniforms, so if someone did spot me, they'd have no way to connect me to my employer. Animals pee outside all the time. Humans are animals. This is fine. I scurried over to the tallest bush in her front yard. She didn't really have much of a yard, more just a walkway lined with bushes and flowers that ran adjacent to her front door. The biggest cluster of bushes, the only one where I could be sure there would be no visible splatter on the side of the house, was about 4 feet from her door. I looked both ways, unzipped and let fly. After the initial millisecond of relief, I noticed the sound was way off, more like pissing on something solid than something leafy. I started panicking thinking I'd aimed wrong, but once I start, I can't stop midstream, so I just kept squinting in the darkness to see if maybe I was hitting a key rock or something and could move just a few inches over. Instead, all of a sudden I hear a way more concerning noise, a deep voice exclaiming, "What the fuck?" And before I could turn around, assuming I'd been caught by a neighbor, a man came leaping out of the bushes. He blew by me, brushing my golden shower off of him. He spit pretty empathetically on the ground, so I think I might have beamed him right in the face. I didn't see where he went after a few paces, and this next part is kind of a blur. I do think I remember hearing a car screech from a bit further away after a minute. I'd gotten some night vision by that point, so I was able to make out his height, build, and outfit, but only the most general details of each. I was in such shock that I didn't even put my dick away. I just stood there trying to figure out what happened. The reality was so terrifying that my mind refused to accept it, and impulsively searched for a reasonable explanation that could make everything okay. I thought, could these bushes lead to some backyard area that just looked like they were against the house? Could they just have been obscuring an open window? My inner voice was desperately screaming, "Bro, that man was wearing a hoodie in 90-degree weather. That was a bad man. You're in a bad situation." But the very idea that I was within inches of a guy who would be hiding in bushes at all, let alone in front of a young woman's house at night, just wasn't something I was ready to grapple with yet. I was coping by not coping. My fight or flight response totally failed me at that point, because my dumbass did the absolute last thing I should have done, and approached the bushes and tried to validate this. There must have been a good reason for the man in a hoodie to be behind these bushes in the middle of the night, theory. So I walked over to the side, turned on my phone flashlight, and tried to peer around the line of shrubbery. Pro tip, as scary as things may look in the dark, seeing them in a single beam with your flashlight can sometimes make it even worse. That's when I saw the bag. There was a tattered drawstring bag sitting behind the bushes, slightly splattered with pee, but I was in such a moronic daze from the shock that I groped around for it thinking, see, this is it. This will explain why he was back here. It explained it. Once I maneuvered it over and pulled it open, I saw a sharp knife, a roll of duct tape, and a bottle of pills. The delusions officially broke at that point, and all the adrenaline, endorphins, and self-preservation instincts that had been suppressed kicked in 10 times over. I became whatever the opposite of dazed was, more laser focused than I have ever been in my life, with one singular goal: get back to my car. I dropped the bag, booked it across the street, got in my car and slammed the pedal to the floor before the door was even all the way closed. I went as far as I could as fast as I could, until I hit a red signal. Then I pulled off to the side and realized I shouldn't be driving any more than necessary in the condition I was in. I pulled into the parking lot of a 24-hour drugstore and took a breath. I was finally calm and coherent enough to zip up and formulate a plan of action. My first lucid thought was, who do I call first? The police? Or the girl whose house that was? I thought about it for what couldn't have been more than 10 seconds, but felt like an hour, and decided, okay, I'm gonna lock the car with the engine running. If trouble starts, I can drive away. I know something's up. She might not. She needs to know to not keep walking in that direction. But as I was dialing her number, it occurred to me, what if there was no girl? I thought I remembered delivering to that house before. But what if I was wrong? What if the girl on the phone was just a decoy to get me there, to rob me? Or worse, every pizza guy on the planet has seen the Evil Genius documentary by now. So I thought, she called me all out of breath. She wasn't home. The whole thing was off. Can't risk it. I'll start with the cops. I called 911. The operator was very helpful in keeping me calm, because I was a complete wreck by this point. He kept assuring me that someone would be there soon. I kept telling them that they had to get here before the girl did, but I was trying to express 3 thoughts at once, and really damaging my own credibility. It came out more as, you've got to save this girl, because he wasn't after me. I was just delivering a pizza. Unless they were after me, in which case there might not be a girl. But I talked to one on the phone, so then you should find that girl because they used her to lure me there. But if she's real, she doesn't know about the guy, who's also real. And there could be more guys if there's actually a girl. And you know what? Even if there isn't a girl, There might actually be more guys. I only checked one part of the bushes, so I don't actually know. But I know which guy is the one I saw because I pissed all over him, you know? I didn't mean to. This was back when I thought the girl was real, but not home. But she might be real, so you really need to find her if she is because the guy was real. Finally, they basically just asked me to stop talking and stay on the line. But that was when I saw an incoming call from the customer. I couldn't answer it without disrupting my 911 call, so I just ignored it. But then she sent me this text like, "Hey, I'm here. Don't see you." I told 911 she was there and they said officers were only minutes away. But who knows how long that meant. Especially after I'd given such a scattered account of the events in my panic. I just felt overwhelmed with guilt because my rational mind said the odds of her being a decoy girl for some large scam targeting pizza guys were low, and the odds of her being an intended victim of a predator were high. So I put my 911 call on mute and turned back, heart absolutely pounding out of my chest, compulsively muttering, fuck, the entire way. Then I took 911 off mute and told them I had returned to look for the girl. They weren't happy about that, but I saw her meandering past the parked cars in the street looking to see if one was mine, and I waved her down, flashing my brights. She bounced on over to the window of my car, happy-go-lucky. I figured that was a good sign that she wasn't in on whatever this was, but I was just so scared to be back in the general area and not know what had just happened or what was going to happen. I kept whispering, "Get in, get in." And she was like, "Get it? Huh? Oh, you want me to get the pizza from the back?" I didn't want to make the same mistake with her that I had made with 911. So instead of trying to tell the whole story, I stuck to the bare basic facts. There was a man in your bushes. I'm on the phone with the police. I don't know where he is right now. Please get in the car so we can lock the doors. I was barely able to get even those sentences out, and I was shaking, like I had had 10 cups of black coffee. I held up my phone with 911 on the call screen to verify it for her. I thought that was why she got in the car with no further explanation, but it turns out that wasn't entirely it. "You still there? Is she with you? Are you safe? Is anyone else there?" 911 kept checking in. Not knowing who the third party I was talking to was, I reassured them and we drove, more cautiously this time, to a location 911 instructed us to wait at to speak with police after they cleared the area. I didn't actually have to do much after that. The police came pretty soon after. A police car met with us. I gave a statement telling them everything I observed, and she went to go speak to more officers in more detail than they needed me for. It turns out the reason she got right into a strange pizza guy's car without probing any deeper into my story is because she knew who the man was right away from my description. She had an abusive ex-boyfriend who was apparently psychotic enough that he immediately came to mind from hearing, "There's a guy in your bushes." She later called us to thank me and insisted on leaving a huge tip. I wasn't there when the call came in, so the kid who answered didn't know to refuse to accept the money. But the manager already promised the next time we see her, we can load her up with enough one-free pie cards to last a lifetime. Easily the scariest thing that has ever happened to me. On the job or off. I don't get the chance to tell the story much, because I try to avoid sharing it with anyone who could possibly know the girl or know of the event. But I'm still not the same since, even though I know he didn't even have anything to do with me directly, this truly shook me to my core. So man in the bushes, let's not meet.
The Frantic lady, outside my hotel. This story takes place about 5 days ago. I'm still shaken up over it. I'm a 19-year-old female, and my parents and I packed up our U-Haul and made the long drive to our new home up north from our small dinky apartment in Central Florida. I can't lie, I was very excited about this move. Attending college in the spring, finally getting to start my dream career, and so many other things I couldn't or didn't get to do in Florida. On the first night of our drive, we stopped at a hotel in what appeared to be a shady area. It was kind of scary as it was set up right in front of a closed down gas station, with boards and graffiti written all over them. From my parents' experience and what I've seen on TV, these aren't the type of places you want to go lurking around in. My dad, who's usually very calm and collected, was on edge the whole night, since the door to our room didn't close all the way. We had to prop one of the hotel chairs against the door and use the deadbolt to have even the slightest bit of comfort. I thought it couldn't get much worse than that, but I was so wrong. The second night, we stopped in a small town in North Carolina. We had our 2 cats with us, so we had to find a hotel that was pet-friendly. We came across one of those hotels and booked a room for the night. While my parents were making sure nothing shifted in the U-Haul, I sat in the passenger seat of my mom's car with my little buddy, trying to calm him down. He seemed more agitated than normal. About half an hour after pulling into the parking lot, we grabbed our cats and our essentials. Emotions were running high, so we were all on edge about getting to our new home in the next day or two, depending on the amount of sleep we got. We loaded our things into the car and approached the hotel's side door. My mom pulled out the key card and it took a while for the door to finally unlock, but the second we heard it click, a woman started yelling at us. We all looked up and saw her frantically running towards us. Her voice was frantic. The panic in her voice still sends shivers down my spine every time I think about it.
She wore a long, dark blue jacket, her hair in a messy ponytail that was tucked inside her hoodie. She either looked really tired, like she hadn't slept in a year, or she had gone through something horrible. She was panting, muttering the words, "Call 911, call 911. There's something wrong with that baby." There was no child with her, nor did we see any kids in sight. My initial thought was that maybe there was a kid near the front of the building that was seriously hurt, or there was a car accident we were too busy unloading to hear the collision. The woman kept telling us to call 911, but my mom told her that she didn't have her phone on her. I always carry mine on me, and me being the kind-hearted person I try to be, I offered to call for her, but the moment I pulled out my phone, my dad snatched it out of my hand. The lady then said, "It's really bad, you need to come see." My mom told her that she didn't want to see, and that we should go inside and the lady could go up to the front desk to get help. At first, she was screaming, No, I don't need their help, I need your help." But my mom kept insisting that we go inside. At this point, my little buddy was whining and clawing at his pet carrier, trying to either get out or attack this lady. My boy might look like a sweet fuzzball, but if provoked, he's a scratching machine. The lady took one look at him and attempted to reach for him, saying, Yeah, let's get the babies inside." The way she said that was fucking creepy. This time she sounded like she was on drugs or had bad intentions. I scooped up my cat before she could touch him, and we led her to the front desk where she told the hotel worker the same story she told us. The hotel worker tried to calm her down, and while the lady was distracted, my parents and I walked towards the elevator and started getting inside. As I looked back at the lobby, I saw the woman staring at us. Her eyes were full of anger now. She then started charging at us, and before I even had the chance to react, my mom pushed me and my fur baby into the elevator, them standing in front to protect me. I could see the woman still running towards us as the elevator was closing. I remember the small screen near the elevator in the lobby, showing which floor the elevator was heading to. So to stop this crazy lady from harassing us all night, we pushed all of the floor buttons and stopped on every floor. First the second, then the third, the fourth, and then the fifth. After the fifth floor, we pressed the button back to our original floor and quickly piled into the room. Silence. My heart was pounding the entire time. My body started shaking at what just happened. As I got my cat out of the carrier, I heard my mom and dad talking about that lady. My dad speculated that maybe she had mental illness or was on drugs, whereas my mom said she could have been a trafficker with the way she was trying to get us to come with her and see the supposed situation. That's when my heart broke. I try so hard to see the good in people, but at the same time, I try to keep the best distance I can, but it was the first time someone ever approached me. I was so gullible to almost believe her story my guard slipped. I tried to hold back my guilt and fear as best I could, but I ended up breaking down. My mom hugged me saying everything was going to be okay, but no matter how many times she and dad kept saying that, my body continued shaking and my paranoia lasted throughout the night. Even at the slightest creak, I shot up from the bed and looked out to the peephole, thinking the lady had followed us. Luckily, she wasn't there. That night, we all decided we were going to get up at sunrise and reach home before nightfall. No more hotel stops, no more creepy people, and no more shady areas. As we checked out the next morning, the same employee from the last night was there, and we asked her what had happened after we got into the elevator. The worker told us that after that, the crazy lady left in a huff, her hands clenched into fists. But then, the worker revealed the detail that my mind keeps going back to. When she turned to go after us, she saw a syringe in that crazy lady's jean pocket. I don't know if she had already used it, or was planning to use it on me and my family. It makes me wonder what the outcome would have been if my parents had not been there, and if I had given the lady my phone instead of offering to call for her. Would she have sold us into trafficking? Would she have robbed us while we were injected with whatever she was on? Anyway, we made it to our new home 2 days ago, but the fear of that night still eats away at me. It goes to show that no matter how panicked and frightened someone may sound or act, you don't truly know if they're genuinely in trouble, or if they have bad intentions after gaining a random stranger's trust. Please be careful out there, guys. I, unfortunately, had to learn the hard way that not everyone in this world is a good person. I'm just happy to still be alive and safe. I hope I never see that crazy lady again. Friend's creepy religion and the weird sleepover at his house. Okay, folks. This happened to me when I was 14. I'm 29 at the time of writing this. I remember this story from time to time, meaning like once or twice every few years, and it still gets me in a weird mood for some reason. Anyways, I was walking with one of my friends in the city the other day. I tried holding her hand, but then she thought I just bumped into her and apologized, so I was able to recover smoothly. Then I saw a group of kids skateboard past us, and lo and behold, that was the thing that sparked this memory, so I figured I'd write it down. I'm not going to use this real kid's name, so I'll just call him Vinny. I come from a town where people you went to school with in kindergarten were the same kids you graduated with. Vinny moved to our school about halfway through the year. When new kids came to our school, everybody flocked to them. At 14, I was kind of a dork, but also kind of a douche, which made me surprisingly likable to most people. Vinny would always sit by himself during lunch. Something I found amusing about him was that he would get infuriated if people asked if he skated. I took that as a chance to try and piss him off, and it worked. The first time he and I had a class together, I remember the teacher asking him if he had his books yet. He responded with, "My wife never confirmed my school schedule with the front office." I remember everybody thought that was funny. You're 14 years old and you have a wife? He was clearly trying to get one over on the teacher. My friends and I were skating after school, and we saw Vinny. I remember talking to my friends about what he said, and we all became oddly infuriated with this kid. It took some doing, but after about a week of letting him hang out with us, he became one of the boys. One of my buddies asked if we could go sleep at his house on Friday night, under the guise that we took turns staying at each other's houses to skate, play video games, and smoke the green stuff. He looked perturbed, which is something I wish mattered to me back then. But the next day at school, he did say it was okay after asking his parents. My buddies and I rode our bikes to where he lived, with our clothes for the night and our skateboards strapped to our bags. We met his family, who at face value seemed completely fine. Then things got a little weird. First, his dad had a huge weapons collection. At the time, I thought it was awesome. He even took us out onto a field in the canal to shoot some of his assault rifles. I know, is that this wasn't cool of him without parents' consent. Next, we met Vinny's wife. Yeah, the girl was real. She was also 26. While we lived in the southern US, even this was taboo. They would hold hands and stuff. At the time, we thought this was dope. It was like dating a senior when you're a freshman, only he was in high school, and she paid taxes. Things got to a new level of weird when Vinny's dad had his arm around Vinny's mom, and his other arm around the girl that couldn't have been terribly older than we were at the time. Apparently, that was also his wife. We then spent about 2 hours praying with the family in the living room. I was raised Catholic, but couldn't determine which religion they were practicing. Once we finished with that, we went outside to start skateboarding. After a few minutes, his dad came outside and ordered us into the house. Vinny's mother then had us stand in line outside of the bathroom to take a bath. It still skees me out, but I remember we weren't allowed to drain the water from the tub. I was the last one to bathe. Also, all of the mirrors in the house were covered with sheets. I don't know the significance of this. It makes more sense for me to not have mirrors at that point. We were told to go to bed even though the sun wasn't even down yet. Vinny went to bed with his wife, and the three of us that remained just laid there in one single queen-sized bed, talking about how much fun we weren't having. The final straw for the night was having to hear Vinny's parents doing the dirty in the next room. It was almost 11 p.m. when we decided to just get on our bikes and leave. It was dark and we had to ride through some of the bad neighborhoods, but we made it safe to my buddy's house. Vinny's mother would also later call our parents and leave some cryptic messages, which implied trouble. Vinny was pulled from school about a week later and we never saw him again. I don't know what that family was into. Maybe it wasn't creepy at all, and I just didn't understand. All I know is that we felt uncomfortable. I have no issues with religion, but if that was part of their practice, I think it was a little weird. Out of curiosity, I went to find Vinny on Facebook. All I can confirm is that he, his mother, father, and one of his sisters had died. There were no public records of what happened to them, or if they even died at the same time. Probably not the creepiest story out there, but still one I come back to. It's worth the tell, and it's an interesting memory. I'll never be able to prove it's him. Trigger warning, physical assault. I'm French, so sorry for my English. My story takes place 2 years ago. I was home alone in my small apartment, working on something for my internship that I was freaking stressed about. It was the beginning of the afternoon, 2 p.m. I think. Someone knocked on my door, but I wasn't expecting anyone. I went to open up, and it was a guy I knew. Let's call him Jim. Jim and I had slept together a few times a few weeks before, until he pushed me away without explanation. We were still friends, but I was a little hurt. Was I that bad? Had he gotten what he wanted and wasn't interested anymore? I didn't care to ask the question because I was getting a little attached, and I preferred to wait for it to pass, especially since we were bound to run into each other again. Indeed, Jim had recently got a room in the flat of a friend of mine. The situation was quite funny, because he had stumbled upon the ad without knowing that I knew the other tenants, and my friend didn't know yet that I knew the new roommate. I was going to tell her about it in person when we met again in college for our midterms, So I knew I was going to see Jim again, but I didn't expect to run into him so soon after he moved in, let alone during a surprise visit from him to my apartment. I asked him what he was doing there. He said he was bored at the dorm and was just passing through. I invited him in, but I was a bit uncomfortable because I still liked him, and we had left without any explanation about his rejection before he moved in with my friend. We talked for a while about trivial things, but strangely enough, I still remember his main points. Then he wanted to show me a new kind of massage against my stress that he had seen on TikTok. I hesitated a bit as I was still uncomfortable. "Do you trust me?" he asked. "Yes." I sat on the floor and he touched my back for a while, then ditto once I was lying down. I don't remember saying anything except at one point his arm was around my neck, and I thought, I'm not sure I can breathe. And then, black out. Of course, the memory of him choking didn't come back right away. It took several months, but I'm trying to tell you the story in chronological order. When I came to, it was dark. I was still on the ground and bleeding. I don't remember if I noticed the injury right away, but I had a large hole in my right side with many cuts underneath. The events are pretty fuzzy in my memory, but I wondered where Jim had gone and why I was alone. I went to look in the hallway, but my keys, which are normally always in the lock, were missing. I found the spare and looked outside. No one was there. Then I had my first stupid reflex. I thought, I'm hurt. I need to disinfect, and started to take a shower. I think I fell asleep and had nightmares of being tortured and kidnapped in the shower, probably a way for my brain to warn me that something bad was happening. I then looked for my phone, which was also missing from the apartment. I was confused. I decided to go to bed and resume the search after resting. I told myself, if I'm still hurt when I wake up, it must be real. It just seemed very logical in my mind at the moment. When I woke up, my mind was a little clearer, but I was still not totally myself. It was 8, maybe 9 p.m. I think. I was still bleeding. I looked for my phone again and I started to panic as I couldn't find it. I tried to calm down and told myself that I was probably somewhere. I just had to ask someone to call me. I contacted my best friend via Messenger through my computer. I still had a hard time unlocking my computer. I couldn't type my code. I think I was still drugged. Luckily, Tom was online. He tried to call me on my phone, but no ringing could be heard in the apartment. I think he figured out that I wasn't in my right mind, because he called me on Messenger to see if I was okay. It was he who gave me the details of our conversation. I have almost no memory of it. I said, if you think you've been hurt, do you call the fire department or the police first? He freaked out and asked me to explain what was going on. I was very confused, but I think he got the gist of it. He asked, did Jim do this to you? I don't know. Maybe. I was still in denial at that point. Tom called the police for me. He couldn't come help me himself because he was studying in another city. And as I waited for the cops to arrive, I began to realize that I had completely messed up the crime scene by touching everything looking for my phone, not to mention the shower and nap. I was still in no pain though. The hole in my side started to hurt when I was taken care of by the paramedics that the cops called when they saw the extent of my injuries. I had to undergo surgery as a result of the assault. It took me months to accept that it was an attempted murder with a knife. I had a hole in my liver, a pneumothorax, and was bleeding a lot. Luckily, my other organs were not affected. While I was in the hospital, the cops came to take my statement and took Jim into custody. I imagine the surprise of my friend and her roommates when they found out that the new roommate not only knew me, but was also accused of assaulting and robbing me. 1 week after the assault, when I got out of the hospital, the first bad news was that the cops had not been able to receive the recordings from the surveillance cameras in my building, which had already been erased because the procedures had been too long. The next day, the policewoman in charge of the investigation told me that, of course, Jim denied having been in my place that day, and nobody was at the flat to confirm if he indeed was at home all day. That's it for now. Go home to your parents and get some therapy. Great. And then I waited. For a long time. I had to have the seals from my building analyzed for Jim's DNA. Without video or witnesses, it was the only way to prove that he was my attacker, or at least that he was in my apartment that day. It took 1.5 years to get the prosecutor's verdict. No further action. No identifiable DNA other than mine had been found at the crime scene. So there you have it. We can't pursue the investigation. I could never prove that it was Jim. I don't have any memory of the assault itself. I don't think I'll ever find them, but I have no doubt that Jim did this to me. I think if I ran into him, I would freeze like a rabbit in front of a car. Today I'm much better, but I still suffer from PTSD. For a while I couldn't drink alcohol, because the drunken feeling reminded me of when I was going to be unconscious. Now I only panic when I'm with someone and have trouble breathing. And most of all, it makes me sick to know that Jim is free to live his life and hurt someone else. Angel in the Snow. Hello all. Fairly new to Reddit, and just discovered this forum, so please feel free to delete this if it doesn't fit the criteria. Though from reading the rules and guidelines, I think it should probably be okay. Also, this is a little long, so I apologize, but I've never written this out before, and never will again, so I figured I might as well tell the whole thing for myself if no one else. First off, this is the only creepy/scary-ish thing that has ever happened to me in my life, which is probably why I think it stands out so much in my memory. In hindsight, the location and general isolation probably made it seem a lot scarier than it was, but at the time, it felt like I had stumbled into the opening scenes of a full-on horror film. Anyways, here's the story. So just over 10 years ago, I was fresh out of college and had moved back to my parents' house for the free rent and food for 9 months or so, before I was leaving the state for graduate school. Now, my parents are super chill and give me my own space in the house, but being a 22-year-old single guy and living at a house in the sticks is certainly not ideal, but I didn't have any other options, so I started looking for some work, more to pass the time than to save up some money. Anyway, so summer turned to winter, and I still hadn't found anything solid, but by then, I desperately needed to spend more time out of my parents' house, so I took a part-time gig doing some light bookkeeping for a small business owner guy that my dad knew. I didn't really want to do it, since it didn't pay much, was short-term, and wasn't even a real office setup, but again, since my parents lived in the middle of nowhere Midwest, I knew I had limited local opportunities to make some cash, and this guy was going to pay me under the table as well. About that same time, a friend of mine in the city said that if I just paid him $200 a month and helped clean up, he'd basically let me crash at his living room until I was ready to move out of state. That was all I needed to hear. I took the job. So my dad's friend's family had a construction type business. They helped out with building stuff a little, but it was ultimately more focused on renting out a few bobcats and large augers they owned. Also other various drills and then odds and ends like generators and other low-level construction or farming equipment that somebody in the area couldn't afford to purchase but needed to use from time to time. This was a small mom and pop type thing where everyone knew everyone, and the office only opened on days when somebody was coming by, and was just generally a mutually beneficial situation for the business owners and the locals. Since I had minored in a business adjacent area and my dad recommended me, they trusted me to go in there for about 15 to 20 hours a week and check and file the rental forms, make sure nobody missed a payment date if there was a payment plan in place, answer an email or two discussing prices and availability, etc. Super easy gig. The old building I worked at was about 90 years old, and at the top of this little hill, the downstairs used to be a country bar until the 1980s, when the family bought it cheap, cleared out the bar, and fenced in the property to use as a parking lot area to store all the rental equipment and gear. I could generally come and go as I pleased, and worked any hours I wanted to as long as I got the work done. So if things were slow and there weren't any rentals for a couple days, I'd usually go in after 7 and stay until around midnight or 1, since I knew I'd be alone and could listen to music loud and take my time and all that. The office where I worked at was on the second floor of the building above the old bar and looked out onto the long driveway. From my seat, I could easily see out the window, and once or twice saw a family of deer or raccoons scamper by, and I always glanced out when I saw movement since it was very noticeable. It was incredibly remote, very still and quiet, so if something unusual occurred, or if something felt off, I definitely noticed it. One night during winter, it had snowed a few inches and my dad told me to stay in because the roads were bad, but I had an old SUV, and more than that, just really wanted to get out of the house, so I went into work at about 8 p.m. and was going to stay until just after 1. I always left the gate open at the bottom of the hill, since, believe me when I say, that nobody ever showed up at night, since we were literally in the middle of nowhere. I think the nearest occupied house was about 2 miles down the road, and to even turn onto our short road, you had to only be coming to our specific building and probably know it was there beforehand. It was a locals only type thing, and very small, since the family had inherited a lot of money and kinda did this rental thing on the side. Basically, someone would never just get lost and end up at our building. So I'm jamming away to some Fall Out Boy, having some coffee, and keep glancing at the snow outside here and there, since our one orangish streetlight reflected onto the ground at the gate and was causing the light to shine off of the snow in a really cool way. At one point around midnight, I went downstairs to the big bathroom to do my bathroom business, and then came back upstairs and got settled into my work. I probably did about 5 minutes of work when I glanced outside and saw a huge imprint of something in the fresh snow just below the light. It seemed like some huge dog or substantial animal had rolled around on the ground on its back or something. Since I didn't notice it just 15 minutes before, it had to have happened while I was in the bathroom, or maybe when my back was turned, since I would have seen that type of movement for sure. I shook it off and assumed that a dog or maybe even a farm animal had gotten loose and was maybe attracted to the light or something. Who knows? At around 2 in the morning, I was leaving, and as always, I got out of my car to lock the gate up. And to be honest, I had pretty much forgotten about the imprint in the snow, but when I looked down, I was shocked to see it wasn't just some disturbed snow, but it was undeniably the imprint of a human-made snow angel. If you don't know what a snow angel is, it's when kids lie on their back in the snow and push their arms and legs back and forth, so when they get up, it looks like the outline of an angel. I used to do this as a kid, so I 100% knew for sure what this was, and it was deliberately made underneath the light post, but it wasn't from a kid, it was from a very large person, or at the very least, a normal-sized adult wearing tons of layers of big winter clothing. I looked up and saw what I already knew, that whoever made this snow angel could easily look up and see me through the window, so they must have waited for me to head downstairs to make this angel. Now, I definitely would have seen or heard if someone drove up to our building, even if I was in the bathroom, so I knew that somebody had walked deep into the freezing cold and snow for a few miles, stopped in front of our building, and then did a snow angel in a small amount of time I wasn't sitting at the front desk window. I glanced around for tracks in the snow, and saw that there was one set that led to the nearby woods to the right of the building, so it was clear that the person didn't use the road, but instead came from the opposite side, which made me instantly uneasy, since that side is just trees and darkness for miles and miles. I was definitely a little freaked out now, once I realized that somebody had just been this close to me secretly in the middle of the woods, and I looked around but didn't see anything amiss at all. Now I just wanted to get the hell out of there. When I got back into my car and drove a few feet, I realized that my boss might be there in 4 hours, and might see the snow angel and assume I did it since he probably assumed I kept the gate locked when I was there. It wouldn't have been that big of a deal at all, but I was young and felt like I might be made fun of if nothing else. So I opened the gate back up real quick, ran over and kicked the snow around so it hit the angel, locked it up again, and went back to my car. Also, I should note that this is what really happened at this moment, but I almost lied here and said something else since it seemed fake, since I assumed the average person wouldn't get back out of their SUV and not just flee in their car because they'd be embarrassed about a snow angel. But at the time, I was insecure and cared a lot about what others thought, so unfortunately this is what I did. Also, I wasn't exactly fully terrified at this point, even though it was certainly unsettling. I just thought that it was really weird and could have been an illegal hunter. Either way, the imprint was made 2 hours earlier, and I assumed they were long gone. But that's when I heard it. When I was getting back into my SUV, there was the loudest high-pitched laughing coming from the woods. It almost sounded like a fake laugh, like the witch in the Wizard of Oz or something. Like something was doing it fake on purpose to show they weren't scared of me, or how I'd react at all, once I knew they were laughing at me on our property. It was close enough that I knew they could probably see me, but I couldn't see them at all since other than the streetlight, there was no illumination. After a few seconds of laughing, they stopped, and then it was just silence everywhere, except for my heart beating in my ears. Then the laughing started again, though louder this time, more like screaming and laughing combined. I sort of froze for like 5 seconds, listening in panic. Now I spent a lot of time in that area, and I know what coyotes and foxes sound like at night, with their high-pitched screeches during mating season, so I can't completely logistically rule that out. But to me, it felt like it was an adult man trying to emulate a woman laughing, like someone was deliberately trying to make a fake scary shriek laugh in order to scare someone. Well, it fucking worked. After that 5 seconds, I immediately filled with adrenaline, got in my car and drove like hell away from there as fast as I could without sliding off the road. Back at home, I was up all night trying to figure it out, and told my parents the story when they woke up. After talking it all out, we decided it was one of two things. Either my brain somehow convinced itself that the snow formation was an angel shape when it was really just caused by some animal, and then the snow tracks and laughing were just a coyote or red fox. Though I don't really think that's what it was. What I truly believe is the second thing, which is that some local was walking around and for some reason decided to mess with me. I didn't really have any close friends left in the area that would do this, and if they did, they would certainly have brought it up to me to make fun of me for speeding away in terror. I found out later that the nearest house was a super old couple, so I highly doubt that it was one of them, which means that whoever it was went out in the woods in the night in the freezing cold just to mess with a stranger. I don't have any mental issues or family history of them, or didn't do drugs. I drank socially at the time, but certainly didn't that night. I also don't believe in the paranormal, so I never once gave that a thought. In my heart, I know someone was out there. I worked there another 6 weeks and never had a single issue, though I knew where my boss kept his gun, and always made sure that it was there when I started my shift, and certainly always locked the gate from then on. Thinking about this experience that night, the part that freaked me out the most was that he had to have waited for me to leave for about 2 hours just to do that laugh. He didn't know me. I could have been crazy and the type of person to get mad and try to fight and attack him, though he didn't seem scared or to care while he tried to mess with me. For some random dude, this is probably a story he tells from his point of view to make all of his friends giggle hysterically. But for me, that dude, the one I call Angel in the Snow guy, the one with the laugh I'll never forget, let's not meet. Black car in London. This happened years ago when I was barely 14. My middle school, and middle school of my best friend at the time, organized a trip abroad to Great Britain, London to be exact. It's supposed to be a few days looking at London attractions, museums, and shops. It was fun, until it wasn't. For the day before we were supposed to leave and go home, we were brought to the streets with some interesting shops, and we received free time for shopping. And then, our teachers and guide had a brilliant idea. They told us after the time for shopping ends, we have to meet at different streets than this. In retrospect, it was like 100 meters away, but they still shouldn't do that. Most of us have never been in London. We barely speak English. We don't have a map of the city, and roaming services don't work correctly. 90% of the students got lost. I got lost with my best friend because we went in the complete opposite direction. We were both confused about the directions we were given. We were walking along the pavement. My friend was running ahead or staying behind to nervously look around. We didn't look like we were together because we were not interacting with each other. I guess that's why this happened. My friend ran ahead and stopped to look around. When I saw a black car approach me and match my speed, I started to feel like this was a scene from a movie. It was broad daylight, there were a lot of people around, and no one reacted. I was confused and I didn't know what was happening. Then from the car stepped out a man and said, "You are nice, come with me," and then tried to grab me. The car was still running, so I suppose someone was still in it. I was stunned. I didn't believe this was real. At that moment, my friend ran from behind me, grabbed me and dragged me away. We ran and tried to lose tail if the man or the car followed us. After some time we stopped and my friend nervously cried, shaking me and screaming why I didn't move when the man tried to catch me. I explained my deer in headlights moment. We cooled down and managed to ask some people for help, and we were found by our teachers. We didn't tell anyone about what happened. We were sure no one would believe us. After that, when we got back, I told my parents and I never went on a trip organized by my school again. My mom considered all of that really unprofessional and irresponsible. This creepy Nightguard tried to kidnap me. This happened about 20 years ago. I was 9 years old at the time, but my parents have also told me their side of the story on a bunch of different occasions, so that should help. My parents are both biologists. They met at work, and from there it's history. The place where they worked at the time was a government building dedicated to biology research, used in government projects turned towards the public, meaning they were the ones studying the environment and making environmental protection laws around their studies. This being a massive old government building, it always had a security guard present, day and night. During the day, these security guards would mostly just stay at the reception and greet people, but at night they would go through their rounds and make sure that there were no intruders because of all the science equipment and computers kept in the building. One of these guards is the Let's Not Meet guy. Initially, he seemed like the nicest person. He was really nice to me, and frankly, all of the memories I have of him before this were really nice. He would greet me and talk to me in the nicest way every time my parents brought me to work. He would make me paper planes, which he was surprisingly good at, and throw them around me, and he would stay with me at the reception in the days my parents had to work into the night. Obviously for me, that would get really boring, really fast. So he'd keep me company and entertain me. Mostly we would talk, play with the paper planes, and watch TV. It all seemed nice enough. Nice enough for my parents to trust him with me, which was probably their biggest mistake. One night, my parents had to go to work even later than usual. I think it was around 10 p.m., and they were still at it. So this guy who was on the night shift decided to take me around the building with him to do his rounds. We started on the top floor, checking all the rooms in the exterior part of the roof. Every room was so dark I'd only stay a little behind and wait for him to turn on the lights. Then we stepped down on the second floor, where my parents' office and labs were. We checked the opposite side of the building, going into labs with massive extractors and every kind of science equipment you might think of. We walked down the stairs to the first floor, where most of the administrative rooms were. I still remember seeing those maps on the walls and the embalmed fish everywhere serving as decorations. First floor was all clear, so it was time to check the 2 basement levels. I thought it would have made sense to check the labs on the right side first, as the left side had a flight of stairs at the end loading up to where my parents were, but for some reason, he decided we'd check that side first. We checked all the labs, but I noticed his pace was accelerating, and he was starting to look around and sound happier, excited even. Once again, we checked all the labs, all the corners from one end to another, turning the lights on ahead of us and turning them off behind us when we left. When we got to the last area, he turned all the lights on and we went inside. There were 3 separate offices on each side of the lab, and on the first one, he hurried towards the printer, opened it up, and took out 2 pieces of paper and made 2 quick paper planes. That's when everything changed. He picked up one of the planes, went outside of the office, and threw it towards the end of the room. He then told me the one he just threw was mine, and that we could throw them around in there. I ran to the other side of the room to pick my plane up, excited to play with it, and suddenly, the lights went off. When I turned around to check what was happening, I saw him getting out of the lab, turning the lights off and locking the door. I ran to the door, punched it, and kicked it while screaming for him to open, panic taking over me because of how scared I was from being in the dark at that time. Through the glass door, I could see him scurrying away in the corridors, turning off the lights as he went and disappearing after turning a corner. I'm pretty sure that everything I felt, and every shadow and creepy monster I saw in there while waiting was part of my imagination, because of how scared I was. I balled up against the corner, and could see shadows moving around me in the dark. I could almost cry, lost, not knowing what was happening, and why he was doing that. My parents finished the work eventually, and when they did, they packed up their things and made their way to the lobby to pick me up and go home. When they got there, the security guard was at the reception, but I was nowhere to be found. They panicked, of course. Must have shouted 100 different cuss words at the guy, and I'm not sure how my dad didn't murder him right then and there. But when they first asked the guy where the hell I was, and what he had done with me, he simply said that he had gone to do his rounds with me, and I must have gotten lost somewhere. This is the building that would take you about an hour and a half to check from top to bottom, even if you're rushing. So must have gotten lost somewhere is not exactly helpful. They must have looked for hours without finding me. It was only when I saw a light far at the end of the corridors leading to the lab I was in that I got the courage to stand up, rush towards the door, and start punching it as hard as I could. They finally found me there and made the guard unlock the door to get me out. I don't really remember sleeping that night, and if I did, it must have been out of exhaustion. But I know I made my mom stay in the bedroom with me the entire night. Of course, my parents made a complaint against the guard, and when they did, the guy started being investigated. He was fired and arrested, not because of locking me away where he probably hoped no one would find me, but because he had been partnering up with other criminals to steal computers and equipment from the building to sell in some shady market, along with the information in the hard drives and make money off it. By then, he had stolen a lot of old computers without anyone realizing, and who knows what his plans were for me that night. I'm not convinced that locking a crying kid in the middle of the darkness, hidden away in some room, is exactly the most normal behavior, if you're not trying to hide them and come get them later when everyone is left and sell them as part of your product. Luckily, he never had the chance to do that, and I really hope he never got to do it to any other kid. The Uber driver who just wouldn't leave. Was chatting to a friend and remembered this creepy story from the pandemic. I, a 30-year-old woman, lived alone. I had no car and no shops nearby. It was 9 p.m. and I had got back from work and realized that there was no food in the house. So I ordered a grocery delivery on Uber Eats. I asked them to leave it at the door due to the COVID rules. There was a knock at the door, and I saw a tall, skinny guy standing right by it. I shouted through the letterbox to leave it at the front door and back up. He said no, and that he had to hand it to me as it had alcohol in it. I hadn't ordered any alcohol, so I told him that he had the wrong order. He claimed it was correct. I told him sternly to put it on the floor and back up, and again he refused. Stupidly, I opened the door a crack to tell him to do it due to COVID rules, and he stepped towards the door and put his hand on the handle. I pulled it shut and shouted to leave, or I was reporting him. He put it down and stepped back. I asked him through the letterbox to back up further. He did, but again when I opened the door he stepped forward. I always remember the chill down my spine when he said, "Pretty, very pretty," in a low monotone. I noticed he had his phone out and pointed at me, and asked what he was doing. He said he had to take a picture, but it was pointed at my face and not the bag on the floor. I grabbed it and slammed the door shut and locked it. I watched through the crack in the curtains as he stood by the door, pacing back and forth as if he couldn't make up his mind. He knocked, but I ignored it. I was getting seriously creepy vibes and called my best mate for advice. She told me to report him and not open the door. I shouted out the letterbox for him to leave, but he still stood there. My dog had picked up on my anxiety and started barking at the door. He turned and got in his car that was parked across the street from my house. I kept watching for the next 10 minutes or so through my window, but he wouldn't leave. He just sat there, but I figured maybe he was picking up another order to take. Suddenly a message popped up on Uber. He told me he'd forgotten a bag in the car and asked me to come get it. I checked my order and it was all there, so I messaged saying it wasn't mine. He got insistent, saying he couldn't leave until I picked it up. He was practically begging me to come to the car, saying it wouldn't take a minute, and I could grab it from the passenger side. I lost my shit. I told him I heard what he said, that I knew he was taking a picture of me and not the order, and that I was calling the police. He still said I had to come get it. The entire time I was on the phone with the police, he was still messaging me, even saying, "The police not come. Pick up order and I leave. Why are you making it hard?" The police told me someone would be there within 20 minutes and to stay inside with the doors locked. My dog was going nuts. Hawk was up barking. My neighbor's husband texted me saying he heard a commotion and asked if I was okay. I told him what was going on and he immediately ran out, shouting at the guy and to fuck off before he got fucked up. The delivery guy peeled out of there, and my neighbors came over to make me a brew and wait for the police. I made a report to both them and Uber, but all I got was an apology from Uber. I got a car shortly after, and didn't use Uber again until my boyfriend moved in. So to the creepy Uber driver, let's not meet again. I think I was almost human trafficked. About 3 years ago, I was a waitress during the height of COVID. It was my first ever job and I remember being so excited to start as soon as possible. After all my training was finished and I got my certifications, I was put on the closing shift. We closed at 10 p.m. every night at the time, and typically it was just my cook and I. Rarely would there be another waitress with me, and I liked it that way. I always worked better alone, and I didn't really get along with most of the other waitresses anyway, so it was nice. I can remember it was near the end of my time that this experience happened, and I'm really happy I had the circumstance I did at the time. I never really could trust my gut very much because I had mild anxiety and couldn't tell if what I felt at the time was valid or not. I mention this because when it all went down, it felt real, and I had an absolute feeling. I started my shift at around 3 p.m. I said goodbye to the last waitress and I was on my own with my cook. Everything was pretty slow and normal, until I got a call about one of the specialty items on the limited time menu we had. The food couldn't be ordered as takeout, and the lady over the phone really didn't take it well. After a little debating, she finally decided to sit in and eat instead. I'd say around 10 to 20 minutes later is when I spotted an older looking car pull up, and these 3 people came out. 2 men and a woman who looked to be in their 30s to 40s. I could tell it was the same lady I spoke to over the phone, judging by her attitude coming in. I further confirmed it by asking since I already had a pretty good idea of what she wanted to eat. What I thought was an act of mild embarrassment and pettiness was actually something much more sinister later on. Her attitude towards me changed when she saw me. She was much nicer and more cooperative. This didn't ring any bells at first, because it was something that most people who wanted to look good in front of others would do. I sat them at a booth and took their orders. I noticed they had a red binder and a black pen. Remember this. I then went to tend to my other customers as there were a couple of tables I was waiting on. Once I brought their food out to them, they asked me if I knew any realtors. I found this to be normal, as this being the tourist vacation state it is, it wasn't uncommon for outsiders to be looking for getaway homes. I would say this was very reasonable for me to assume it was nothing, if they didn't already look like the unsavory type of people, if you get what I mean. Nonetheless, I gave them the phone number of a realtor I knew closely and well, since I often went to church with her. There wasn't any notable interactions I really had aside from the occasional small talk, if I wasn't doing anything or refilling their drinks. It was around 4:30 p.m. now, and they were the last on my tables to leave the restaurant. If any of you were in the food industry, you know that as a server, you don't really get breaks, just a lunch most of the time, and sometimes not even that if it's a super busy day. So my cook and I took this as an opportunity to take a well-deserved break. We walked out behind them and had a small chat with them. I should mention by now that the front of the restaurant had a disabled ramp coming up to the doors. It was long because the building was on a raised foundation. This is important. Now, I didn't really notice at the time, but one of the men took my cook to the other side of the ramp, down near the end, and was chatting with him over a cigarette. I was behind a railing at the top of the platform where the ramp plateaued. Luckily, the other man and the woman were on the other side of the railing, about 5 feet below me but in front of me. We were having some small talk, and they started to ask some personal questions, such as if I lived in this area, if I smoked weed, how old I was, etc. I hadn't quite learned yet that telling strangers such personal things wasn't a good idea. However, this for some reason was starting to raise some red flags. I gave very vague answers to all her questions as best I could. Unfortunately, they still persisted in trying to have some sort of communication with me outside of my work, whether or not I said no. I suppose when they finally realized that I wasn't going to give that information up, the woman finally got to her point. She told me that she had a business offer for me. It was for a cleaning service. I don't like cleaning anyway, so regardless I would have said no. However, what she said next solidified the answer. She proceeded to tell me that she owned a maid service called the Pretty Kitties Maid Service. She said that they need pretty young girls like me, that she had 10 girls now as it was, and she wanted to expand. She mentioned how they all got paid $30K. She didn't specify the time length, and how it would be a great opportunity for me to help her with her business. I instantly knew at that point that it certainly wasn't a maid service business, and I was in danger. However, I didn't understand just how much danger I was in. I politely declined her offer and told her I liked my job as it was, that I was satisfied working for my boss. She tried to further convince me by telling me how easy it was, and reiterating how much I'd make under her supervision. She mentioned how she had a van for her business and described it to me. I can't exactly remember what she told me, but I do remember how she told me to follow her to her car. She said she showed me a picture of her van in her car, but her phone was in her hands. I knew for certain I wasn't going anywhere with her, or near that car. I declined yet again, and said that I was fine right where I was. I said she could show me her phone instead, but she was hesitant. After which she proceeded to end the conversation and left with the two men. A little shaken, I walked back into the restaurant with my cook and told him what I had just experienced. He joked about how I'd have good money if I went with them. Because I didn't take the situation as seriously as I should have, I laughed with him. At the end of that night, the cook's grandmother came to pick us up. I mentioned the weird interaction. A panicked look came over her and she sat silent, staring at me. I got confused and asked her if everything was okay. That's when I learned the signs of human trafficking. She broke it to me that I was almost trafficked, and that I was incredibly lucky I didn't get kidnapped. My stomach dropped and I started to panic at the realization of just how much danger I was in. Nothing really happened after that, except for that red binder and black pen I told you to remember. I went to work the next day and a customer walked in. Now, normally in my part of town, not many people like to sit and relax for a while. They're mostly just there to eat and leave, as it wasn't exactly a cafe. When I get into my apron, I sit this gentleman. He was well dressed, not in a suit and tie, but just nicely dressed. He was alone. I sat him at a booth and took his order of one single coffee, and he had a red binder and black pen with him. I didn't even notice until my cook from the night before reminded me of it. I was so shocked at the fact, and it unsettled me even more that he proceeded to sit there for 3 hours, watching me as I tended to my tables. I kept asking if he needed anything else, and he asked me if people never just sat and relaxed with coffee. I sort of shrugged and said no, not here. Now, this might come as a surprise to some of you, but servers, believe it or not, do listen in on some of your conversations. I'm lucky I did with this one. I specifically remember him speaking over the phone about finances and how he needed to find another house. He spoke about moving money and how he was going to pay his girls that night. I ran to the back of the kitchen and told the cook. Thankfully, he came out to help deliver some plates in order to throw the guy off. It worked, I think. He ended up leaving not long after that, and I haven't seen or heard anything since. I'll tell you though, I've been much more on guard since then. TLDR, I was almost human trafficked and didn't know. Thanks to some gut feelings, I wound up as one of the lucky ones. No, I wasn't able to report them because their car was facing forward towards the building cameras, and we couldn't see the license plate. Yes, I told my manager and he never allowed any of the servers to leave the building without someone else walking them out. I made it known throughout the whole staff about what happened since I didn't want any of them to get hurt. I used this story as a way to tell others to please be safe and be aware of your surroundings. I didn't think this could happen to me. It could happen to anyone. Be safe and be observant. The old man in the apron up the road wouldn't leave me or my family alone. So, for context, I grew up in the suburbs, and outside of the occasional play park or sports field, there was nothing to do. Me and my neighbors used to play knock and run, or its other name, ding dong ditch. For context, I have a sister who is a year younger than me, and my neighbor James is the same age as me. His older sister was 14 at the time, and she also played with us from time to time. Also, I think she just wanted to hang out with my sister, whom she thought was cute. I was admittedly the biggest coward in the group, and to this day, my flight instinct is significantly stronger than my fight instinct. I would also never ring the doorbell, as I would always find a way to wiggle out of it. I always found watching it more entertaining than doing it. On this particular afternoon, my cousins came over. One of my cousins was my age, the other was a few years younger than me and couldn't play with us, and the other was a year older than me. But everyone treated him like he was an adult, even though he was only 11, or at least that's how I perceived it. Let's call this cousin Daniel, as he is somewhat important to the story. I'm not a reliable narrator, as it's been almost 10 years since these events, but I would try my hardest to remember them. Anyway, I'm getting off topic. My cousins came over and we were banished outside to play, and we all decided that knock and run was a good idea. We usually just played around our immediate street, never venturing further than the next street over, out of fear of getting lost in the copied and pasted suburban streets. We made our way up the street to the play park at the top of the hill. It sat where a house could have been, and someone could cut across it onto the next road. As we sat on the play equipment, We decided that a vote should decide who knocked first, and of course, I was picked. I remember getting myself out of it, and getting my older cousin to take my place. I am thankful that he was, and is as proud as he is. It helped me get out of a lot of situations. We decided that our first target would be the fanciest looking house in the area, a white marble house with a fountain in the front yard and a curved driveway. I remember sitting next to a car, as I was small enough to look under it from the curb, and I had a clear view of my cousin sneaking up to the door and ringing the doorbell 3 times in order to get the attention of whoever was inside. Then he bolted down the pathway towards the street to hide behind the cars. But before he got to the fence, an older man in a black leather apron with what I assumed was paint came sprinting after him. I immediately knew something was wrong. This wasn't the usual response to a knock and run. Sure, we had encountered some angry people before, but this was something very different. He practically flew down the walkway towards Daniel and threw his hands out to grab him. This didn't feel like anything someone his age could do, and it scared the shit out of me. I think I might have been the only one with a clear view of what was going on, which meant that I was the only one to see what was happening. It wasn't until the man was practically on top of Daniel that he noticed he was being chased, and the scream that he made when he realized this will always stick with me. As I said at the start of this, Daniel was and still is a very proud person who will always try to prove himself. So hearing this scream of pure terror struck at my core. Everyone was clued in at this point as to what was happening. Daniel didn't open the waist-high gate at the end of the path, he just jumped it, which I think ultimately saved him from getting hurt as the old man had to take a second to open it. Daniel was sprinting down the street as fast as I had ever seen him. "Stop, you little shit," the man shouted with a deep, angry voice, which did actually stop Daniel in his tracks. They were both standing in the middle of the road at this point, reminding me of an old western movie when 2 cowboys would be standing at either end of the main road. The man marched straight up into Daniel's face, and I could finally get a good look at him. His skin resembled rough leather, and a few strands of hair on his head had long since grayed. He was clean shaven, and he was wearing simple white pants, a white button-up, and the black leather apron that had what I had rationalized as red paint on it. After he was maybe half a foot from Daniel, he started to berate him, and I could only make out the words, "Sick people in there." Everything about this man threw me off, and I could see my neighbor and my other cousin, who was hiding in the bushes, felt the same. My neighbor's older sister, who I'll call Tay, screamed out at him from the other side of the road, which gave Daniel the opportunity to run as fast as he could away from the man. We all ran at that point. I don't think I or anyone else knew where we were running off to, but I found myself in the car park of the shopping center across the road from me. I waited there for maybe 30 minutes, just watching cars come in and out, feeling safer with the large group of people. I had no idea at the time if he chased one of us, but I knew that I was safe. I made my way back to my house and found that I was the last one to return. My cousin Daniel ran straight home, and Tay followed him. My other cousin and neighbor ran around the suburbs for a bit before deciding to go home. My mom was missing when I got home, and I realized that she had been told what happened. My mother is someone who isn't afraid of protecting her own, and she is one of the strongest people I know, so I felt pretty safe that she was aware and was off telling him to fuck off. But when she got back, she seemed off. She didn't want to talk about it or anything, and any color from her face had completely drained. We slept at my neighbor's house that night because my mom wanted to talk to my dad about something serious. I think we all knew what it was about. Nothing happened for a while after that. Not for a while. But my mom was a lot more protective of what we did outside. We were no longer allowed to play knock and run, or go up the road without a parent. It really bugged my sister, who loved to play outside, but I don't think she fully understood what happened. I have a lot more stories about this guy, and I probably will write more, because this has helped me get a better grip on everything that happened throughout that year. But I hope you enjoy the very first event of one of the worst periods of my life. Okay, so before I get into the next few events, I think that it is more important to address some things that I've read in the last post. I know that we were the ones who originally disturbed them, but I thought that it was important to dedicate a post to that event, as it kind of kicked off a lot of stuff. I will probably update this post with a few more stories just to get it all out there, but I just wanted to say that I fully understand my and everyone else's part to play in part 1. But I believe that the issue really began after that, which is what I'll show you today. I'm sorry if I upset anyone. Thank you all for the positive reception to part 1. It means a lot to me that people are interested in what I've got to say, which makes me feel better about writing about the other events. First things first, I promised a few of you that I would ask my mom what the old man had told her last night at dinner, and I did manage to do so. She was surprised that I remember what happened and tried to sweep it under the rug, but I kept pressing her for answers. I'm not proud of pressuring my mother into talking to me about something like this, but curiosity got the better of me. I know that isn't an excuse, but I feel it somewhat justifies my actions, as a lot of you wanted to know as well. After I pressed her for more answers, she grabbed my arm and led me to my room before placing me on my bed.
She sat next to me and told me not to repeat anything of what I said to my sister, my cousins, or anyone else who was involved with that man throughout the year. She finally opened up about how she was sitting at home watching TV when she heard a loud knock at the front door. It was my cousin Daniel and my neighbor Tay, who looked terrified and exhausted. After letting them in and grilling them for answers, my mom was rightfully pissed that someone had spoken to them in such a way, and so she got up to go and confront the man. And on her way out, my other cousin and neighbor arrived, who she also sent inside. She was concerned about where I was, but Daniel made it clear that I had ran in the opposite direction of the man and that he would go out looking for me. My mom made her way to the play park and saw the man pacing back and forth up and down his driveway. He didn't seem angry or upset. He apparently didn't seem like anything besides someone marching back and forth, which took my mother's mood from enraged to confused. She walked up to the front gate and let herself in, which made the man stop almost immediately and stare at her. I'm surprised she didn't turn back and go home at that point, because that's what I imagine anyone would have done. But as I said in part 1, I am a coward. The man marched up to my mom and started to berate her about trespassing on his property, which she meant by berating him about terrifying some kids. This apparently went on for a couple minutes before he said something that terrified her. My mom didn't exactly say what this was, because she said that she was trying to forget it, but he said something along the lines of, "I'll show you both what it feels like to have somebody on your property when you don't want them there, and then I'll shut those fucking kids up forever." He tried to grab her at that point, but she quickly moved away and left his yard, swiftly walking back home. This really affected my mom, but that was the answer I got from her. I gave her a hug and apologized for pressing her to tell me, and we got back to dinner shortly after. I don't regret her telling me, but it just feels like knowing the end of a movie and seeing all of the hints leading up to it, recontextualizing a lot of stuff. It had been about a month, maybe a month and a half since the first initial incident with the man. We hadn't seen him since, and I was forgetting about it until I went to the shops one day. For context, my parents had started to let me go to the shops by myself to grab little things for them. I was young at the time, and the shops were across the road from me, so getting there wasn't an issue. One day, my dad asked me to go and grab a loaf of bread for him. He gave me $2 coins and sent me on my way to the shops. I was getting used to doing this on my own and enjoying my independence. I grabbed the bread, which was on the far side of the large supermarket, and made my way towards the registers. I stopped by the toy aisle and took a look at all the low-quality mass-produced action figures that I desperately wanted. This was part of my routine. Even now, if I wanted something but didn't have the money to get it, I would just go look at it. But on this occasion, I wish I had just continued to the registers. I felt 2 hands push me on the ground from my left. I was shocked for a moment, as I didn't fully know what had just happened. The sticky and dusty floor beneath me hurt. It took me a second to look at my attacker, and when I did, I immediately knew this was very wrong. It was the old man from up the road. He had found me in the place that I had hid from him just a month prior. He started to shout at me, but I couldn't understand what he was saying. I don't know if it was just the adrenaline ringing in my ears, or his rage just taking over, but the tone in which he was shouting shook me. I tried to get up and run, and when I planted my foot on the ground to get up, he kicked it out from below me, which made me fall back on the ground. Thank God a staff member arrived at this point. They must have heard me shouting from across the store and came to check on what was happening. I didn't get a good look at the staff member, but I am thankful for them. As I got up to run with the loaf of bread in my hand, I could hear the man reacting to me getting away, and it took everything in me to not look behind me to look at him, but I knew he was furious. I ran straight out of the store with the bread without realizing it, and almost threw up from all of the emotions. I told my parents when I got home, and they both made it clear that I wouldn't be going on any shopping trips by myself from here on out. They didn't think about how me and my sister walked together to school, which in hindsight should have been something that they thought of. The trip to my school wasn't a long one. It was just over 1 kilometer long, or just over half a mile, but the trip was still tough on small legs. There were quite a few hills, which added time to our trip there, and the path went along a creek with nothing around it. It was nice and isolated, which helped me relax my mind after school. Not long after the supermarket incident, me and my sister were walking home from school and just made our way to the beginning of the path along the creek when we saw an SUV that had been parked there for what I had assumed had been a while. I thought it was empty, but as you could probably guess, it wasn't. We turned to enter the creek when the SUV car door opened, and we heard someone shouting out to us, "Hey, do you guys want to drive home?" It was the man. My sister, who was always trusting of others, started to walk towards the truck, but I quickly held her back. "What's wrong?" said the man in a cheerful tone. This was very different from the unintelligible screaming from just the week before, and I obviously wanted nothing to do with this man. I quickly started to lead my sister towards the creek, and the man quickly scooted over towards the door. "Wait up, I'll walk you home,"
I should have just run up the hill towards the school, but instead I started to sprint down the creek. Looking back at this, I feel stupid. Daniel was faster than me, and the man had been able to catch up to him in seconds, but for some reason he didn't leave his truck. All I heard was another unintelligible scream and his truck driving away. My sister was beyond pissed that we didn't get a ride home and that we had to walk, but I didn't care. She and I were safe, and so we continued walking along the path. Thinking back to it, the path was beautiful and connected on either side to small, quiet streets, the perfect in-between of isolation. Sadly, my young mind didn't realize that the creek opened up to two quiet streets, and so when I saw the same silver SUV on the street at the end of the path, I froze. What could I have done? I felt powerless and had to take care of my sister, who was only now figuring out that this man may not have good intentions. I had decided that the best course of action was to cross the creek and walk through the bushes to the other side. This was beyond a dangerous idea as there were slippery rocks, animals, and running water. This could very easily have injured or killed us, but somehow we managed. We climbed over logs of wood and under tree branches, through prickly bushes, and through large plants, but we managed to do it and crossed over to the other road that we followed towards the main road which took us home. Obviously, those two SUVs could have been different, but at the time, I was certain that they were the same, and even now I'm not 100% sure if they were different. I only found out about this later, but my parents got the police involved at this point, but based on the fact that much more stuff happened, I'm going to say that they probably didn't do much. There were a few other things that happened throughout this time, like mail being stolen, our bins being pushed over, and the front door knocking at early hours of the morning that we knew were him, although we had no real proof. The last thing I will bring up before I end this post is something that I'm not 100% sure was a dream or not. For context, my dad used to have campouts with me and my sister. We would sleep out on the couch, and my dad would sleep on a mattress on the floor. The couches we would sleep on were right next to the front door in the living room, and we would watch movies with pizza or some other type of takeaway. It was really fun, and I remember those nights, but one particular night will stick with me. Everyone else went to sleep, and Naruto was on. I hadn't watched or read Naruto at that point, but I recognized the characters. I was sitting directly next to the large window that looked out onto the driveway. I was just enjoying doing nothing when I saw some movement out on the driveway, and so I looked out, and there he was, walking up to our front door, wearing his white pants and white button-up t-shirt. He was staring directly at our front door with such focus that it felt like nothing would break it, but something did. It was me. He looked at me, and I could see in his eyes that it was funny to him. He simply held his hand up, waved at me, and then placed one finger on his mouth as if he were telling me to shush. Then he jogged away. I surprisingly fell asleep not long after, and for the longest time I thought it was a dream, until I read all of Naruto and recognized the scene. It was then that I realized that it might not have actually been a dream, and that he might have been attempting something, and after what my mom had told me, I think I know what he was trying to do. So it's been a while since I've given you guys an update. I've been busy with school, and digging up these memories is a little distracting for me. I would like to thank all of you for the incredibly positive responses to my post. It makes me feel better about all this. But without further ado, let's just start the story. It was summer, and the local council decided to have a fair. The local council hired a few clowns, some face painting stations, food trucks, and bouncy castles at the local football field. Of course, me and my sister were beyond excited to go. For a young child, this was the hottest ticket in town, and my parents were happy to take us, as it was just down the road and free. I remember the field being beyond busy. The crowd was difficult to walk in, and even harder to see through, but we managed to find ourselves right next to the giant blow-up bouncy slide. As it was summer, the actual balloon of the slide burned to the touch, and the sun made me feel like I was slowly melting. Regardless of this, I must have spent at least 40 minutes going up and down that slide. I was having too much fun and didn't notice both my parents and sister had gone missing in the giant crowd of people. I got down from the slide, put my shoes back on, and started to make my way through the crowd. I didn't actually know where I was going, and I remember feeling incredibly anxious as I waddled around the fair. It wasn't until I felt a hand on my shoulder and then my forearm that I felt a little safer. It was my dad. I thought he had found me. I couldn't actually tell whose arm it was, as the angle which it was holding my arm made it difficult to look at in the crowd. The whole day was overly stimulating, and I wasn't thinking clearly. I should have known from how hard the hand was gripping me, or the fact that it was leading me toward the parking lot, that something was wrong. I only really felt terror when I saw my parents running towards me, running faster than I had ever seen them run. Adrenaline immediately coursed through my veins. I pivoted my body around and immediately saw the leathery hand on my arms and white pants. The link was connected to my mind as to who it was. My mother's scream was the first thing I heard, and the angry or annoyed grunt of the old man followed it. He started to jog with me towards his truck, but I started to fight back against his grip. He may have been old, but he was stronger than any elderly person should be, and he was faster too. Everything about this man was wrong, and it may have been my very young mind making it all up, but I still believed that something was very weird about him. No elderly person should be like this. At this point, I was only a couple feet away from his car, and as he opened the door, I felt 2 hands on my right arm pull me hard against the man's grip. The man's grip held on before my dad came out from behind me and slammed the old man's head into his car, which loosened his grip on me. My mother grabbed me and ran, and we went straight home. Apparently, they didn't notice me slip away on the bouncy slide, and they ran into some family friends who offered to take care of my sister while they searched for me. I don't know what type of person it takes to do something like that in such a populated area, but this man was not normal. Not in the slightest. My dad returned later that night. He looked pretty roughed up and drained of all energy. From what I had gathered over the years, they got into a pretty brutal fight that ended with the police breaking it up. My dad didn't get into much trouble considering that he had called the police on the man before, but they still took him to the station to give a statement. When he sat down on the couch, he looked exhausted, bruises forming all over, and a cut on his lip and upper eyebrow still leaking blood. But he had a smile on his face, and I could hear him telling my mom that it was over. They were both hopeful, and so was I. A couple weeks later, my cousins came back over, and Daniel wanted to know everything. He felt like he was the main victim and deserved to know everything, because he was the one that the man shouted at, and the one that the man wanted to get the most. I don't disagree that the man would probably try to hurt him on sight, but it felt weird to me. Almost like he was trying to take credit for something that to him sounded like a creepy story, but to my family was real. Anyway, we decided to go out for a bit. My parents trusted us because we were with my older cousin. We went up to the usual play park, which was across the street from the man's currently vacant house. Daniel was telling us all about how he swore that he saw him near his house. Keep in mind that he lives almost 3 hours away. I'm not saying that he's a liar, but I am saying that he wanted to be part of this. Anyways, we were playing hide and seek. Tay, our neighbor, was seeking, and she had just only started to count down from 60. I always tagged along with Daniel because he always found the best spots. We ran across the road to the man's house, and Daniel jumped the fence, which I immediately stopped at. "Come on," he said from the other side of the waist-high fence. "No one will find us." The house felt like a void we would get sucked into, and I had up until this point refused to even be near it. But for some reason I agreed. I joined him in the man's yard, and to my shock, Daniel wanted to go deeper into his home, not just the yard. I made it clear that this was a very bad idea. Even if he was in custody, jail, or whatever, we would be breaking into someone's home. Daniel didn't seem scared by it though. I think the whole idea of being in the man's house seemed attractive to him. We went around the side of the fence to his backyard. It was overgrown, almost like no one had been living there for years. I made my way towards his back window and looked inside. From what I could make out, he was a hardcore minimalist, only having a TV, chair, fireplace, and a shelf that housed some photos of a much younger man with some medals. He was a veteran. It changes nothing to me, but it explains his above-average speed and strength, especially for his age. The sound of a door sliding open almost made me yell in fear. Daniel had found and unlocked the sliding door and wanted to venture inward. I ran around to find him, but he was already inside before I could stop him. At this point, I was also curious to find out more, but I understood the risk of this all. But it didn't matter if I understood it, because I went in with him. The rest of the house reflected the living room. The kitchen had a fridge and a stove, and the dining room only had a small table with one wooden chair. There was no decoration on the walls or sign of life besides the sad reminders of how lonely this man had been. As I said, this changes nothing for me. I hate this man more than anyone can know. We made our way upstairs and found 2 completely empty rooms and 1 bedroom. Just a single bed and a bedside table filled with different types of weapons. A hatchet, a knife, and a knuckle duster. I had never seen a knuckle duster before, and I successfully fought the urge to take it and put it on. This was something that Daniel failed to do, as he almost immediately grabbed it, which I almost hit him for. We continued to search the house, and Daniel had the idea that he must have something weird in his wardrobe, and when we opened it, he gave a disappointed sigh, as there was nothing inside, except a few white button-ups and white pants. This especially creeped me out as he never wore anything else. We made our way back downstairs and into the living room, and to our surprise, we missed the table that sat next to the couch. It was just out of view and only had 1 drawer. Daniel opened it and struggled to get it out fast, but when he did, we found something profoundly strange. It was a single photo. Neither of us could make out what it was, but we knew that it looked familiar. Daniel sat down in the chair bored, and it was only then that we heard Tay scream out that she had given up. Daniel shot up and sprinted back out to the backyard. We had both completely forgotten about her, but as I put the photo back in the drawer, something stood out to me about the photo. The fence was navy blue. This was something very unusual in my area, and I knew of only 1 navy blue fence in the suburb. Our side door entrance. This realization made the photo seem much more clearer. The white pebbles on the ground leading to the backyard, the cream color of the garage next to it, the green bush at the end of the path. This was my home. He had a photo of my home. I quickly met back up with Daniel and Tay, and we went back home. I should have told my parents, but I was scared that I would be in trouble if they found out that we were in his home. I understand why we would be, but I still didn't want to live up to it. About a month after that, we were having another camp out with me, my dad, and my sister. Both my sister and my dad had fallen asleep with the TV on still, illuminating the room. It was one of those weird situations where you were both really comfortable and really uncomfortable. This was my situation, and on most nights I loved this feeling. But that feeling will always be tied to this night. I was drifting off to sleep as well, but I heard the sliding back door open slowly. I peered up above the couch and saw the silhouette of a man standing in the doorway. I froze with fear and started to cry. My dad woke up at this point. I'm not entirely sure how. Maybe it was parental instinct, but he knew almost immediately that something was wrong. He got up off the bed and crouched towards the dining room, which is where the back door was. The other man had began to slowly walk through the house at this point. Murmuring to himself. To my horror, I recognized the pants. The bright white pants. So many questions went through my mind. The most prevalent one being, how? He was in custody. But none of that mattered because there he was, standing in my dining room, holding something. My dad charged him from around the corner and tackled him to the wall. The old man punched him in the arm, and my dad immediately dropped that arm. It was the knuckle duster that Daniel was wearing. It was at this point that the lights turned on. I don't know if it was my dad or the man, but they came on and my dad made a noise of pure horror. Both men were fully healed from their last fight, but my dad took a real beating. I had always expected that the old man had his ass kicked, but now I'm not so sure. My dad was standing in the doorway of the living room shielding us with his body. My sister was awake and crying at this time, as was I, and my mom also ran down the stairs and immediately saw everything that was going on. The man lunged at my dad with a thing in his hand that I could see was a hatchet. My dad threw himself to the side, and his other arm got grazed by the hatchet, drawing blood. My mom at this point leapt towards the old man and pushed him into the kitchen bench, which made him scream, but he was up almost as fast as he was down. He slashed at my mom and missed her, and my dad ran to the other room and started to call the police. My mom was dodging his slashes while also throwing things at him. Once she got to the knife block, she armed herself with 2 knives and threw one of them. The handle hit him in the face, knocking him back. My mom then took the opportunity and drove a knife into his shoulder, which made him scream again. He fell to the ground and didn't try to get up until the police arrived. After this happened, we moved. Not too far away, maybe just half an hour away. Even though we live so close to that place, we have never returned. As much as I have been tempted to go back and relive some stuff, for the time being, I'm pretty comfortable staying here. Apparently he paid bail and was staying at the hospital for a while before staying at someone else's house. I know that he made his way back to his house before making it to my home. It creeps me out to think that I could have been in his home at the same time as him. Well, anyways, it's been 10 years, and it's been something that's been on my mind for a while. I want to thank you all for hearing my story, and I think it's tradition on this subreddit to say this. To the old fucking creep on the road who terrorized my family, let's not meet again. I am never exploring, ever again. Now this is something I really want to talk about, to be sure that everyone is cautious and stays level-headed at all times. Now for context, I live in the middle of nowhere in Canada. It was an old town that had quite a few abandoned buildings due to the absence of residents. Me and my friends were tired of the lack of entertainment options for us, so what we did was explore these abandoned buildings. Prior to the experience I'm about to talk about, we never had anything too crazy happen to us. Occasionally we'd see a small bit of blood-like liquid, and we did see a pentagram on the ground from someone who went to a house previously, but nothing too bad, until the last time I had gone exploring. Now when I was younger, I used to go to a daycare that was part mental hospital. It closed down due to a lack of patients and lack of children at the daycare. I decided to go back there with my friends a few years ago. For context, I was 15 when this happened. Most of my friends were the same age. When we did get there, it was rather cliche. There was fog, it was rather dark, and there was a light drizzle of rain. We went to the main gate, which was padlocked shut. We decided to help each other hop over it and made a ton of noise. We were laughing and giggling the whole time, unsuspecting of what was to come. We looked around the small play place/park with flashlights we had on our person, but even with our somewhat powerful flashlights, our visibility was rather limited. We decided to enter the decaying building. Glass and dirt crunched over our feet as we stepped into the daycare section of the complex. There were still old Legos, wood chips from previous furniture, old torn dolls and toys strewn about.
The further we walked around the daycare section, we naturally became more and more silent, until all we could hear was the crunch of dirt under our feet. I found some crayons in a plastic container in the corner of the room. I walked over to pick them up when all of a sudden we heard a loud crash coming from behind the metal door leading to the psych ward part of the building. My friends and I looked at each other. As a whole, we were a group of 5. Most of them were very bold and cocky. We all looked at each other and my friend Brian suggested we go look and see where the sound came from. Personally, I was not too fond of the idea, but with my group of friends, there was no way anyone was going to decline such a thing. We all stacked up on the door and opened it. It was rusted to the floor, and we heaved to get it open. As we walked in, the metallic smells and must became stronger, with a hint of something else which I couldn't put my finger on at that moment. We walked in, our flashlights pointing in every direction with Brian leading the group. The hallways were tied to the left and right were the occasional metal doorway, some with doors open. I felt slightly claustrophobic, and it felt a little hard to breathe. As we continued, we all stopped walking as Brian slowly entered the room. "What is it?" I asked him. "I thought I saw someone in there. It seems all fine now." To be honest, I thought he was just messing with us to increase our anxiety. But looking back, I think he was completely honest. He backed out of the room, and we continued walking deeper into the psych ward when another friend swiftly told us to stop. We came to a halt and all listened. In the distance ahead of us, we heard the subtle pitter-patter of footsteps echo through the hallway. We all looked at each other, fear in our eyes. Brian continued walking towards the sounds. We considered turning back for a second without Brian, wondering if some ghost or something was in the building, but we couldn't do that to him. The closer we got, the more I felt like I was being watched. When finally, we entered a room on the right, which had the smell of rotting meat. In front of us was a dead deer. Its innards were spilled all over the floor, staining the concrete. A friend of mine had a very weak stomach and vomited all over the floor. That's when we heard the whispering from somewhere. Brian shone his flashlight to the corner of the room where a man with short hair was standing with his head down. He wore a bright green t-shirt stained with what I assume was blood, and torn beige pants. He didn't have any socks on and his feet seemed damaged. He was twitching sporadically and continued to mumble even after we saw him. We stared at him for a solid 30 seconds before he made his first true movement. He looked up at us with a haunting grin that sent shivers down our spines. "You guys here for the feast?" He said each word with varying inflection and energy. This kicked us over the edge, and we bolted out of that room all the way back to the daycare center. The door was still open and we decided to try and slam it shut, but the rust and pure weight of the door almost kept it open. It took 3 of us piling all of our strength to close it, and just before we did, I could still see the silhouette of the man watching us, his white teeth being the only other human feature I could see. We sat behind the metal door catching our breath for a second, all looking at each other for confirmation that we all saw the same thing. After a little bit of labored breathing from each of us, we heard a light tapping on the door. That's when we decided that it was time to leave. We booked it out of the vicinity completely and ran home. A year after we visited the spot, police went back to do a routine search of the area and found the man. It was stated that the guy used to go to the psych ward before it was closed down. He escaped the facility he was transferred to and lived off of the wildlife around the complex. When the cops brought him in, he had a series of diseases and sicknesses from eating raw meat, and his mental condition was much worse than before. There were future rumors that he did kill someone in the forest while searching for food, but nothing has ever been confirmed. In the end, guys, be careful, especially in dangerous areas such as abandoned buildings. And creepy dude, let's not meet. Here's the place. I thought I was alone, so I tried to sleep. I was wrong. This story is something that I think about from time to time, and it creeps me out, so I'm writing this to get it off my chest. Anyways, let's begin. Almost 3 years ago, I was 17 years old. At this point, I was accustomed to being in horrible situations. All I had was my mother, and she could not hold down a job for long because she had her own issues to tackle. So as I grew up, we stayed in and out of roommates' houses. We never really had our own place to stay except twice, but that didn't last long either, and we would be forced into a new environment with the snap of a finger. When I was 17, we were led into a situation where we were going to be homeless again, and I was used to it at this point, as I had slept on the street more than I'd like. The day comes when we have to leave our roommate's house and my mom is able to stay at her boyfriend's trailer. I had nowhere to go because I had no friends at this point, as I halted my friendships because they were bad for my health and mental state, and were overall toxic. My mom offered me to go with her, but I didn't want to, as I felt that getting in between my mom and her boyfriend was kinda weird. Plus I'm used to the street, and I didn't think it was as bad as it was at the time. So here we are. I get dropped off at a McDonald's and I eat some burgers before I go off into the streets once more. Eventually the sun fled, and darkness was all that remained, so I looked for a place to sleep for the night. I went into many places that night trying to sleep, but none of them were working because it was either too hot, the lights were too bright, or the mosquitoes were biting me. That's when I remembered a house I used to go into to chill in. This house was under construction and nearly finished, so all the doors shut and the windows were all settled so there were no mosquitoes. I go through the back like always and I make my way upstairs. Eventually, I settle in the bathroom because there is less debris on the floor. So I lay there and try to get to sleep. Eventually I hear some sounds downstairs, but I didn't think anything of it. I figured it was the door that I came through, swinging open and closed or something. Eventually, after laying there for maybe an hour, I open up my phone and I look at photos of my life, thinking about how messed up it is that I got to this point and how I lost everything. The noises were still happening this entire time, but I pay no mind to it. At some point, for whatever reason, I get up and go to sit down on the back porch because I just couldn't sleep. I make my way downstairs and out the back door to the porch. I'm messing around on my phone for maybe 5 minutes when it happens. I see movement to my left from the back door I just exited from. I glance over and time itself freezes. At first, I think that it's an illusion, but I was in fact wrong. I see a man shrouded in darkness peering past the wall inside to gaze at me. The lower half of his figure was behind the wall entirely, and I could not see anything but his upper body. The rest of his body was leaning to the left, peeking behind this wall, almost like the man was trying not to let me see his full body, as if it would make his presence known. The man was a pure black silhouette, and I could not make out any features. After noticing him, I just sat there and stared at him for what seemed like forever, but was probably a minute or two. I expected him to come outside and talk to me, because I normally talk to a lot of homeless people, and I had thought this man was just homeless. He didn't come outside though. He had not moved at all actually. He was as still as a statue, quiet as a mouse, and maybe if I had not noticed him, he would have stared at me the entire time. Eventually, after staring at him, I got up, got to my bicycle, and made my way out of the property. As I'm walking out the backyard, I peer into the window that is next to the door I saw the man in. The moonlight revealed the man was still there. Only now, he was watching me walk out of the property. I could tell because the moonlight had revealed the top of the man's head, and I saw his left eye gazing at me. He was a white male who was very tall, and had a jacket of some kind on. I could not make out many details because he was still cloaked in darkness. After seeing this, I just moved a little faster out of there. I got to the front of the house on the street, and I looked inside to see if I could see him again. I could not. I got on my bicycle and waved goodbye to the house because I figured the man was still watching me. Then I drove away. For the rest of the night, I could not sleep. I tried 2 different spots, but both were no luck. This is where the story ends. I know I didn't have a crazy chase, fight to the death, or anything, but this was real life, and it's not the same as the movies or books. I don't know what the man was doing in there. I assume he was trying to sleep like I was, but the way he was staring at me was very unnerving. It makes me wonder how long the man was in the house for, and what would have happened if I actually fell asleep in the house. Would he have stared at me while I was asleep, completely blinded to his presence, or did he have other intentions? I'll never know, but now I don't go into houses like that anymore at all after this experience. So to the man shrouded in darkness, let's not meet again. The one day I woke up late may have saved my life. I've told this story in other places, on other accounts before, but it bears repeating. One day when I was an elementary schooler, I was awoken by my mom in a rush. She had overslept, and since she always woke me up in the morning, this meant I too overslept, and now, there was just no way I was going to be ready for school early enough to get on the school bus. If I remember correctly, school started at 8 a.m., and my bus pickup time was 7 a.m., but it was already like 6:40 or something, and I was still in my pajamas and hadn't even had breakfast yet. So my mom decided that today, we would just tell the bus driver to go on ahead and she would take me to school, which would give me plenty of time to get ready. So I'm sitting there at the dining room table eating breakfast, still in my pajamas, and now it's about 6:50. We hear the bus pull up about 10 minutes earlier than usual. My mom peeks her head out the door into the foggy morning and waves the bus on. She closes the door and comes back inside, but the bus doesn't pull away. There's a knock at the door and my mom opens it to find a man in the bus driver uniform. He explains that he is a substitute driver because the regular driver called in sick. He says he knows he's a few minutes early, since he wanted to get an early start on the route since he didn't know it well. My mom explains to him that she was going to take me to school since we woke up late. He gets visibly upset and says that he can wait a few minutes since he's already running ahead of schedule. My mom insists that no, I won't be ready to go in a few minutes, and tells him to go on ahead. He seemed angry about this, but turned around and got back in the bus and left. I returned to eating my breakfast, and still don't have my school clothes on at this point, but at 7 a.m. sharp, another bus pulls up to my house.
Mom thinks this is weird and goes outside to talk to them. She comes back inside looking terrified, but doesn't really say anything about it and tells me to finish getting ready for school. At the time, I didn't know what happened, but Mom would end up telling me a few years later. When she went to this bus, she found that it was being driven by my regular bus driver and that it was full of the other kids that are usually on the route. My mom asked the driver about the substitute and about him calling in sick. I never called in sick. There's no substitute driver on my route, he says. The driver immediately called dispatch in a panic and told my mom to go inside and call the police to report this incident. There was absolutely no one doing my driver's route that day. Whoever this was most likely a kidnapper who had targeted me. I never heard anything about it again. Not even if someone else had ended up being picked up by this mysterious fake bus driver. But chances are, had I gotten on that bus, I would have never made it to school or back home. And if my mom hadn't overslept on that specific day, I would have been on that bus. Creepy apartment chase. This happened over 10 years ago, so excuse me if the details are a little fuzzy. When I was in high school, my friend Claire came to sleep over. We made some plans to sneak out and hang out with some guys, and then one of them would drive us home. We go out to our friend's apartment, have some fun, and at around midnight we decide it's time for us to head back. But when we ask to be taken back, everyone says no, despite previously agreeing to bring us back. Everyone said that we were too drunk or too high, so we eventually decided to just start walking back, and we would make some phone calls to see if anyone could pick us up and bring us the rest of the way back. My house was a good 20 minutes away by car on the highway, so there was no way we were walking all the way back. The apartment was towards the back of the complex, so we start making our way to the entrance. We don't even get halfway there before a car slowly starts rolling up behind us. I was 15 or 16 at the time, and very naive to the ways of the world, so I wasn't too concerned. But Claire was a little smarter than me on this night. She tells me to walk faster, so we start walking faster. The car also picks up its pace behind us. Again, she tells me to walk faster, so we start moving as fast as we can, and that's when the car pulled slightly in front of us, and two of the passenger doors open and two men get out. Realizing there is no walking faster to get out of this situation, she instructs me to run now. So she takes off running and I follow her. She runs towards a group of parked cars and jumps behind a pickup truck, and for a minute, we hope and pray we weren't spotted. This is where the details get a little fuzzy. One of them must have gotten back in the car at some point, so there was only one of them following us behind the truck. We hear the footsteps quickly approaching and she quietly indicates that we're now going into stealth mode. This man is on the other side of the truck that we're hiding behind. He's circling the truck looking for us, and we're slowly and quietly circling it on the opposite side to avoid being spotted. It felt like a scene from a movie or video game. We somehow managed to do 2 or 3 circles around the vehicle without being detected, and by the grace of the gods, he gives up and decides to go back to the car with his friends. This is our one shot to get away. She tells me to run again, so we run for what felt like an eternity, but in reality was probably only 15 to 20 seconds. We find a pool house area and find a spot to hide. We were hidden behind some fences and bushes, and we were anxiously waiting to see if they discover us. Their car pulls around to the pool house, and we're biting our nails hoping they don't stop and get out. The car slowly drives away and we realize we haven't been spotted. We were safe now, but the car circled around the apartment complex for hours and hours and hours. They weren't giving up on looking for us. We were safe for the time being, but now we need to find a way out of there. It was the middle of winter, and of course we were dressed to impress the guys we were hanging out with, so short shorts and revealing tops. We were freezing. We found a dirty and disgusting Captain America blanket that we huddled under while making phone calls to find someone to pick us up. We tried contacting the guys at the apartment, but no one answered our calls. None of our friends answered our calls. We felt completely alone and hopeless. But at around 5 a.m., someone finally answered and said they would pick us up. The best news I had ever heard in my life. Our friend gets to the apartment complex, but can't find the pool house. The group of men are still constantly circling around, so there's no way we're coming out of hiding. We managed to figure out where our friend is at with a little detective work, figuring out what building they're facing, what's in front of them, are there dumpsters nearby, etc. We figure out where they're at, so we make a run for it. We spot the car and hop in as fast as we can. Go, go, go! I tell them and our friend speeds off towards the entrance. We passed a group of men on the way out and that was the last we saw of them. We made it back at around 6 a.m., just in time to sneak back in without my parents ever knowing we even left. If Claire hadn't been there with me that night, I definitely would have been abducted and possibly killed. I'm so thankful for Claire and our friend that picked us up, but a big fuck you to the adult men we went to hang out with as teenagers, and especially fuck you to the guys who intended to harm us. On a happier note, I am now very diligent and aware of my surroundings, and we washed the dirty Captain America's blanket and shared custody of it for years after this encounter. So to the men who terrorized me and my friend in a shitty apartment complex,
Let's not meet again. The time I was stabbed. This story was when I was younger and braver, and kinda did stupid stuff without thinking. It's a wild ride, and it's all true. I used to work at a pizza shop down the street from 2 until they closed. Usually I didn't get off until 11 or so at night. I had a car, but was close enough to walk, so I did that most days to save gas. This particular night, I was doing my usual thing, jamming to one of my playlists, tired, but happy to have a good job and just generally happy with the way my life was going. Up ahead about a block from my place, I see an attractive guy in dark clothing walking by, but not with a purpose really. He was taller than me, maybe 5'10" to 6 feet, and had shaggy brown hair. The closer I got to him, the more I could tell he was really good looking. Like even in the dark of night, I was starting to get excited. His features kind of escape me now, but I do remember his hair and his thick eyebrows. I took an earbud out, and, because I'm from a dangerous city, and never really cared about stranger danger, I decided to talk to him, maybe even flirt a little bit. "How's your late night going?" "It's good. Just looking to get drunk." "Oh, that I can help you with. I've got a mini bar at my place. I live just down the street." That was, not verbatim, how the conversation went. During the walk back to my place, I got no red flags from this guy. He seemed totally normal, and I was honestly thinking, wow, just through sheer luck I met this super hunky guy, and he seems cool and fun. I was beside myself really. So we get to my apartment on the second floor. I jump into host mode and offer him to have a seat and make himself comfortable. My apartment is about 640 square feet, so it's very small, except for the bathroom. You can see the rest of the apartment from any area. I head into the kitchen, and while I'm pouring drinks, I glance back over at him. It was then that I noticed the first red flag. As I was asking him questions, he is more delayed with his answers, especially more so than he was just on our walk there. It was just odd to me. I go back over to the couch, pass him his drink, and sit down next to him. "So what do you do for work?" I asked. "Oh, I'm not here for sex." He puts his drink down on the table. "What do you mean? I'm not after sex either." He stands up. "What you got?" he asked me. His nice guy vernacular and friendly face are now gone. I'm having a hard time processing what he means by this. I said, "What you got?" The second I stand up, he pushes me back. I fly across the room, hitting the floor, but not hard enough to pass out or anything. I get right back up, but he's already grabbed my laptop and my work bag. As I start towards him, he cuts around me and makes his way towards the front door. I'm right behind him when he makes it outside. I manage to grab a hold of him and we tussle again in the front door. Now I shout out, calling for help from the neighbors. It's late at night, so no one comes. I'm shouting, "Please help, I'm being robbed." The thing is, he has my laptop. It's not just any laptop. I hate to admit it, but my entire life was on that laptop at the time. Important photos that I did not have backed up, thousands of dollars of music programs, video game programming stuff from a development team I helped, really expensive software, etc. It was, in my mind, irreplaceable. I give chase down the stairs, across the dog walk park, and as I start to gain on him, we tussle again, and the only thing I can focus on is my laptop. I knew that I had to at any cost get my laptop back. That was absolutely all I cared about. Somehow I get a grip on the laptop. I tug at it again, and I guess he decides I'm not worth all this struggle. He gets up and starts to take off again. I now realize he still has my work bag. It has my cell phone and wallet in it. I take off towards him, and this time, he shouts back at me, "Follow me and I'll stab you again." This makes me stop in my tracks and he gets away. Underneath the street lamp along the sidewalk, I immediately inspect myself. Was I stabbed? No way. There's no way. Then I see blood running down my leg, and I see blood on my arm. 2 places where he cut me good. I'm scared, but the blood makes it look a lot worse than it is. I decided that's enough. I got my laptop and that's all I really wanted anyways. I hobble back home, get inside, and lock my door. I called the cops using my neighbor friend's phone the next day and filed a police report explaining the situation, showing the stab wounds and declining medical services. So all that guy got was a crappy cell phone and a wallet with like $30 to $40 in it. The cop called my friend several days later and said that they were not able to find the guy and that he would keep me posted. This was years ago, so I don't know where the robber is now, but I do have every electronic thing of importance backed up on multiple drives to this day. His girls. This is a story about my sister and I growing up. My parents moved into our house about 6 months before I was born. When I was 4, my sister came along. It was an idyllic childhood for 2 young girls, and most of our days were spent in a large oak tree on our front lawn. Then there was Sammy. Sammy was about 7 when I was born, lived next door, and was special needs. This isn't going to sound nice, but we were a little frightened of him. He was a big kid, and very loud and strong. My parents explained why he was like that, and he was never malicious, but we just didn't understand. One thing that freaked us out was that he would often watch us as we were in the front yard. In hindsight, that was our saving grace. One summer when I was 8, making my sister 4 and Sammy 15, she and I were out in the front yard as usual. We were making tents for our American Girl dolls. Lost in our work, we didn't notice the man with stringy oily hair watching us from the sidewalk. "You little girls having fun?" he asked. We nodded silently, stranger danger embedded thick in our skulls at the time. "What's her name?" he prodded, pointing at my doll. "Molly." "Mister, we have to go inside now." I yanked my sister up by the arm. "See you later," he replied. We ran into the house, leaving our dolls outside. The man was all but forgotten after lunch when we went back out to play. Except, Molly's clothes were missing. I thought stupidly that maybe a squirrel had taken them, when we heard someone clearing their throat behind us. It was the man, and he had Molly's clothes. "I need those back, please," I said, to which he replied, "Come get them." It wasn't smart to go up to him, little sister in tow. It really wasn't, but I wanted my doll's clothes back. Of course, the second we got close, he grabbed both of us by the arm and started yanking, pulling us towards the creek that ran to the other side of the street. My little sister was screaming. I was in shock and must have felt like a bag of cement, and I clearly remember thinking, wow, Mommy's going to be so sad when she can't find us. A great lurch from behind threw the man off his feet, and he and my sister went down while I unsteadily held my ground, spinning to see who it was. It was Sammy, and he was fuming. He kicked the man, grazing my sister in the process. "Nobody touches my girls," he stuttered, kicking the man again. The guy took off running. Sammy scooped my willing sister up, took my hand, and walked the two of us back to our house, where my mother was frantically running onto the lawn, having seen the end of the encounter. The man was never found. Unfortunately, Sammy passed away last year of a heart defect that he had long suffered from, and there wasn't a dry eye in town. That's all for this video. If you would like to get to know me a bit more, then turn on post notifications so that you can tune in to the live streams. The best way to support this channel is to leave a like and subscribe, but if you want to go the extra mile like these people, you can become a channel member for only 99 cents a month. But regardless, I appreciate it if you made it this far. I'm Cole Coffin, and as always, thanks for watching.